Chapter 111, Surrounded. Mahmoud Sheikh/Dial. Well, this trip to Russia hadn't held back in being weird as shit. On the plus side, I knew where Ursa Major was. He was using a tree like a baseball bat while roaring like a maniac. Mikhail was a bear man. Who would have thought? Seriously though, yelling out Winter Guard, break them while looking like Ivan Drago in human form? Awesome. He smashed a monkey out of the air, roared in annoyance when some plasma bolts hit his furred chest, then raised his tree bat and turned a gorilla into a pancake while making a shockwave that shook the ground. A whole lot of monkeys were flying around for the rest of us to fight though. We weren't in a clearing though. The area was very hilly, with small cliffs, boulders, logs, mud, and high piles of snow. Perfect for us to split up and conquer without getting overwhelmed. But with the Omnitrix turned off I only had one option to attack with. Well, I was fighting Warhammer monkeys. Might as well embrace the madness. I raised my sword and leaped forward with the cry of the Luna wolves. Kill for the living, kill for the dead. Crimson Dynamo roared in agreement, rushing forward like a ball of lightning surrounding a dangerous power core. Was Mikhail's wordless roar. Our two groups charged each other with death in our eyes. Lifted 20 feet into the air by my jump jets, I came down sword point and boots first. I hit a flying chimpanzee like a meteor, my sword slicing through its chest with all my weight behind the blow. The chimpanzee roared angrily as we hit the ground, punching me in the chest. Thank God for my armor, because chimpanzees are insanely strong. I raised my sword and slashed out like Nat had taught me, cutting the chimp's head off. A gorilla rushed me, only for Creel to grab it in a full Nelson. Phantasma dropped down alongside me, holding her magic sword. With a shout, we slashed the gorilla on the chest, making an X symbol across its chest and destroying it. Thanks. Creel barked. Phantasma and I shared a grin with Creel. He tossed the broken machine ape aside and punched another in the face, brawling with it. Phantasma flew to join Mikhail, and I leaped into the air again, slicing one of the baby monkeys out of the air. As I dropped, I passed by Sky. Both of us hit the ground together near a servitor. Before it could shoot us, I sliced off its plasma arm. The creature tried to attack us with its actual hand, but Sky lashed out with a plasma palm strike, the heated attack tearing through the servitor's chest with fire and force. That is so badass, I shouted. Right, Sky said in exhaustion. A gorilla dropped in between us, sending us both stumbling. He swung his left arm cannon at me, forcing me to duck. When he swung again I blocked the blow, only to shout at the pain. Yeah, big mistake trying to block a superpowered gorilla with metal limbs with a sword. My armor's servos whined as they took the immense blow, my arms feeling as though they were about to break. Then a giant red hand wrapped around the gorilla's green orb thing, squeezing and pulling hard. In a pulse of energy, the orb was pulled out of the gorilla's back. As it whined in pain, Dynamo slid around to join me. In that weird moment of synchronized thought, she blasted out electricity while I stabbed the gorilla in the chest, ripping the damn thing to pieces. Blood for the blood god. I roared angrily. Too much, Dynamo said. Yeah, I felt it, I said with a wince. Still cool. Then I was getting attacked again, and Dynamo was blasting the monkey's/ape's back. I backpedaled while slicing and blocking, my armor getting blasted bit by bit. A monkey/ape slashed and shot at me as well and a gorilla was rushing me. I used a chopping move Nat had apparently learned from the Red Room to cut a chimp head off, and kicked the other back, sending it flying. I stumbled on a rock. Oh fuck. I shouted as my back hit the forest floor. The gorilla roared and rushed toward me. I crawled backward as it raised its arm. Tree. A sudden tree slamming down from heaven, smashing the gorilla down to plant itself into the earth. Ursa Major growled at me with a beery big grin. Think green, duh. I laughed, then spun up to my feet to rush for the next fight. Craven dropped from the trees, sliced into a monkey with disturbing ease, then jumped back into them. That was the first time I saw him. But the evidence of monkey and ape robots having been sliced apart by more ruthless blades than mine was all over the forest floor. At that point, he dropped next to me. May I? He asked with surprising politeness. Before I knew it, he had taken my sword and confronted a gorilla. He sliced off the green orb from its back, then its cannon arm, throwing my sword back to me when he was done. When the gorilla lashed out, he ducked under it and stabbed the gorilla in the heart. The gorilla tried to keep hitting him, so he pulled out his Bowie knife, flipped back in the air, and threw his knife, the blade digging into the gorilla servitor's brain right between the eyes. Thank you, Craven said with a savage smile. I needed the extra length. There's a dirty joke in there somewhere, I mumbled while he disappeared again. I landed in the center of our little group, where Cowlson, Fitz, Simmons, May, and Vanguard were fighting. They aren't running out of people, or robots, or monkeys or whatever. I panted. A monkey got on my back, claws tearing at my armor, the pressure hurting me from its immense strength. I reached back and wrapped my fingers around its tiny head. As the screeching baby monkey flared metal claws and fangs, I tossed it to the ground and stomped down on it twice, bone and metal crunching under my boot. We must gather. Vanguard blocked a plasma bolt on his shield, then spun to toss it at the offending monkey. I found myself dueling a chimpanzee in claw-to-sword combat but I could still hear and see what was happening to the others. The servos. Fitz shouted when a gorilla rushed toward May. Left arm, just under the armpit. With incredible accuracy, May shot the gorilla 3 times where Fitz had indicated. The green glow of the left arm cannon faded immediately. The gorilla, not the least bit discouraged, since, half robot, half badass jungle animal, continued to rush forward. On the back, the power couplings, they should look like silver quarters. Fitz shouted shakily. May didn't respond verbally. She simply lowered her pistol and waited calmly as hundreds of pounds of enraged super ape rushed toward her. At the last minute, the gorilla was about to tackle her. She jumped up, placed a boot on his shoulder, and flipped over the gorilla. In midair, she fired at the power couplings Fitz had indicated. The gorilla shuddered in place, unable to move as electricity was diverted from machinery to flesh. May did a finisher with a few more shots to the head before she ran out of bullets. This doesn't make sense. Simmons shouted from where she was ducked next to Carlson. These are too weak. We're being outnumbered and maybe overwhelmed, and you want these things to be stronger. Carlson asked incredulously. The gorillas are powerful, but the flying monkeys are only really dangerous to us because of their numbers. Simmons yelled. This job leads to a lot of weird sentences, Carlson noted. But the servitors we had in autopsy were much more formidable. What are you saying? Vanguard shouted. This might just be Kragoff trying to drown us in numbers, with the real forces elsewhere. Simmons ducked under a plasma shot with a squeal. I ran for the monkey that had attacked her, taking a plasma shot to my chest before slicing him out of the air. Then we have to finish this, Carlson declared. I can do it. Phantasma flew up to us. If you give me space. I don't want to accidentally hit anyone. Winter Guard to me. Vanguard agreed. Creel. I shouted. My best friend was holding a gorilla in the air, forcing the cyborg to fire on his allies. When he heard me, Creel tossed it aside and rushed over. We gathered around Lola in a circle, still fighting the monkeys. The area became thick with the damn things. Chernobog was the last to join us, the dark god roaring with glee as he smashed cybernetics and flesh to a disgusting paste on the forest floor. I sliced another head off, shouting as I did so. Now, Phantasma, now. She floated above us, waving her arms around her. She spoke. Shinobog shuddered in happiness while the rest of life in the area flinched. The words that left her lips made my limbs weaken, and I blinked heavily when I noticed my vision start to blur. With a final, caustic word, her eyes glowing purple, she thrust her palms outward. Two things happened. First, a large circle of violet flowed around us. The monkeys began to beat on it. A gorilla Mikhail had been brawling with getting its arms cut off by the shield and choosing to continue attacking with its fangs. Then Phantasma spread her arms out, eyes trailing purple energy, sparks coming to life around us. Burn, all of you? With that, a skull rose in front of us. A violet one, surrounded by flames. I can leave it at that, at just that generic description. But something about this thing. Chernobog was laughing. My heartbeat rang in my ears. I felt like I was seconds from death. The servitors began to burn as the skull floated there. Purple flames erupted around us all, using the flesh around it as fuel. The skull just stood there. It looked serious, somehow. Less like the grinning smiles of fiction, more like the imposing image of a judge laying down a sentence. A demon of hell, making its sentence known. I was reminded of Ghost Rider, of what I thought he might look like. And while I watched, every servitor stood still. Slowly, they turned to ashes, even metal burning in violet fire. And the wisps of white? The souls Chernobog had been eating. They ignited. Beautiful, Chernobog whispered. He held a hand out reverently, pushing it through the purple shield. His hand began to burn. He twisted it slowly. His smile was gentle. So beautiful. The fires faded away. The skull slowly floated to look at us. Eyeless orbs panned over us, as though trying to discern if we too deserved our enemy's fate. Deep within those orbs, I could see a pinpoint of red. Maybe, if I looked closer. Chernobog was right, it was sort of beautiful. Maybe a closer loo. Enough. Phantasma clenched her fists. Slowly, the skull faded away before us. When it was gone, the shield fell. Fitz stopped speaking, then shook his head. What was that? Magic, I whispered. There's no dash. He stopped speaking again, eyes roaming the landscape of purple fire. Above us, Phantasma's eyes closed as the purple fires around us and the energy around her faded. She fell out of the sky. Massive bare arms caught her, holding her close. Mikhail looked down at her as he slowly lost his fur, his human form revealing itself as he gently clutched Phantasma's unconscious form. Good work, Lastaka, he said softly. Chapter 112, Nuke. Massive bare arms caught her, holding her close. Mikhail looked down at her as he slowly lost his fur, his human form revealing itself as he gently clutched Phantasma's unconscious form. Good work, Lastaka, he said softly. That was. Sky gulped, looking about the battlefield. Crazy. But it exhausts her of most of her energy, Vanguard said, looking on with concern as Mikhail held her. She'll be all right, she just needs a break. Mikhail had stopped shrinking, now left shirtless with torn-up pants a la the Hulk. Which made sense. She can rest, Carlson said, eyeing Mikhail. In the meantime, mind explaining anything? Mikhail winced. Well, I suppose I have a few things. We all stopped when a buzzing sound filled the air. All of us turned to see another servitor fly in. May and I stepped forward side by side, as did everyone else, all of us brandishing weapons as a group. The thing came to stop in front of us. It had no weapons or claws. It looked like an orangutan with wings and a, really? You had to keep upping the crazy? I asked. The image of Ivan Kragoff stared out at us from a screen embedded in the belly of the thing. He smirked. Impressive, isn't it? Allows for long-range communication on the battlefield between a general and his forces. So does a cell phone, Sky noted. Kragoff scoffed dismissively. Then he narrowed his eyes. I give you this one chance, Winter Guard. As daughters and sons of the motherland, you must understand that I do this for you, for all of us. And yet, here you are, working for the Americans to attack me. I'm British, Simmons cut him off. Scottish, Fitz added. Yeah, and we work for the United Nations, not America, Carlson explained further. You are all enemies of Russia. Kragoff swung an arm out, tossing things aside. You wish to keep her weak and defenseless. Keep from the greatness she deserves. Yay, logic isn't working. I mumbled. Does it ever? May said to my right. Speak, now. Mikhail barked, striding forward while clutching Phantasma. One chance, Kragoff snarled. One chance to simply walk away. Leave the Americans behind. Go to your leaders and tell them of what I do for our people. That we must see me creations, for the betterment of all. Without depending on, here he eyed Phantasma and Chernobog. Fulmagics and disgusting false gods, he looked at me. Or alien monstrosities. Chernobog smiled. Oh, how funny. I was worshipped by the Slavs of old. I'm the most Russian one here. Though I suppose I should thank you for the meal. Kragoff snarled angrily, the orangutan carrying his screen shuddering. Make your decision. Russia, or death. Vanguard shook his head. We will come for you. And you will pay for what you've done. So we're agreed that we're kicking his ass then, Creel said, crossing his arms over his barrel chest. Not if you want to live. Kragoff's face faded to reveal an image of a small town. A village, really. As a Soviet scientist, I was privy to many of our bases. Most have been abandoned, leaving only their remains. Remains an intelligent man could use to his advantage. He smirked as the camera zoomed in across the cold landscape, slowly coming in on a place that looked, well, military. Stone bunkers, lots of helicopters and tanks destroyed by the decades of ice and wind over time. The camera slowly panned in until we were entering a base, and then quickly to be natural, the footage stopped in what looked like the bottom room of the place, a big room covered in snow with dozens of seats around a big central space, like a round amphitheater. In the center was, oh, you fucking asshole, Creel said, dumbfounded. It was big, and ugly, covered in pipes, with lots of wires, a series of lights on it, and a single symbol resting on it. The symbol for radioactivity. You made a nuke. I shouted in shock. Dude, what the hell? Silence. Kragoff shouted. This is a necessity. If you don't follow my demands, the nuke will detonate on a timer, killing millions in the surrounding cities and villages. The camera flipped to show a group of servitors. They were flying, running, and a couple were in cars driven by robotic skeletons. We will be attacking another base, to prove once and for all the strength of my army. If you interfere in any way, I will not tell you where the bomb is. It will go off, without you there to stop it. Kragoff narrowed his eyes. Make the smart decision. Or see the death of millions. Your choice. The screen turned off, and the orangutan tried to fly off. Until Chernobog leaped forward and grabbed it out of the air. No, I'm going to need you soon, the dark shadow said simply. Carlson looked over at Sky. So, you got the coordinates. Yep. Sky chirped. Guy really loves to talk, so I had plenty of time to trace the connection, and the software used the video he sent to figure out the other locations. Mikhail blinked, before looking over at Crimson Dynamo. Can your armor do that? It will. Somehow she managed to combine impressed and determined in one sentence. In the meantime, we have 3 objectives, Vanguard growled. He hopped up on top of a log and looked down at us. The plan hasn't changed. Mikhail, and I had anticipated needing to split up, and I believe we have the best plan. Galina, you said you were working on a counter. Yes, Galina stepped forward. Fitz, Simmons, and Sky were all working with me on a virus that would cause the cybernetics within the servitors to react violently to their biological components. If we can get to Kragoff, we can upload it directly to all the servitors. Then that is Team Alpha's job, Vanguard said firmly. Carlson, May, Craven, Galina, Sky, and Fitzsimmons will head to Kragoff's location. Team Beta will be stopping the servitor army attacking the base. We need enough powered forces to stop them, so dial dash. I think I should head to the bomb, I interrupted. My tech form, jury rig, can disable the thing in seconds, even use it to make something that will help people. Vanguard bit his lip, then nodded. Very well. Mikhail, he hesitated, then reluctantly continued. Creel, and I will intercept the army. Carlson, I will need to borrow your flying car. Damn it, Carlson said, pulling out his key and tossing it. Fine, but if you scratch it, you're paying for it. We all looked at Lola. Her fender fell to the ground, and some sections where plasma bolts had melted the sides smoldered. The poor girl had had better days. Well, scratch it more, Carlson amended sadly. Vanguard sighed, then continued. We need someone to defend Phantasma dash. No need. Chernobog walked over to Mikhail, still holding the struggling orangutan in his right fist. I'll take care of this little problem myself, he said with bared teeth. Mikhail watched him, clutching Phantasma protectively. If you heard her dash. Chernobog chuckled. Wouldn't dream of it. For such a wonderful display, summoning even a portion of that creature, the little lady deserves to partake. And to be honest, I'm too bloated for another delicious bite. As we watched, he reached for the ape in his hand. The poor thing stared at it curiously. His clawed fingers dug into its chest as though diving through water. It screamed. With a single pull, a wailing spirit was held in Chernobog's left hand, the orangutan going limp in his right. He twisted the soul in his hands as we all watched in horrified curiosity, then slowly moved his hand over Phantasma's lips. She breathed in. The spirit entered her mouth and nostrils in a stream of white. There she goes. Should have a fruity flavor, like apples, Chernobog chuckled. I wish my scanner wasn't broken, Fitz whispered. I need to know the science behind this. Oh, it is science, Chernobog whispered back, eyeing Fitz. Ancient, with an understanding of the energies of the world. Few study this anymore. But there is power here. Forgotten power and pretty damn cool power. Phantasma's eyes snapped open, the entirety of them glowing shades of purple, switching between them. She breathed in again, then looked around at us, settling on Mikhail. What happened? You saved our asses, I said, getting a look from her. Thanks, Phantasma. She sighed in relief. Mikhail slowly lowered her down and she primly flipped her hair. Well, it is my job, after all. Vanguard smirked. I'm glad. Because I have one more, he pointed to each of us. Team Omega is Phantasma, Chernobog, and Dial. You will leave together to stop the nuke. He will most likely have defense. We will need Chernobog to absorb the radiation in case this jury rig fails, while Phantasma will aid you in the offensive. Nuke? Phantasma asked, stunned. I'll tell you on the way, I promised. You were kind of out of it before Chernobog fed you a monkey soul. He did what? Phantasma said, giving the grinning darkness a shocked look. Well, ape soul, technically, I noted with a frown. Only the energy, Chernobog explained. Soul food ain't good for mortals. You fed me a monkey. Phantasma shouted angrily. You have your missions, Vanguard said, cutting us all off. Sky. Here, Sky brought up a map of the area on a hologram. Dial and Creel should already have these in their armor and gauntlet. My HUD did indeed show our targets. Then you have your assignments, Vanguard snapped his arm out. Go. Running across the snow and leaping around with the jump jets was slower than flying, but not by much. If I could, I would have turned to Fast Track or Astrodactyl, but I didn't want to risk running out of time on the Omnitrix mid-battle. Better to change before a fight, when I could do the most good. We didn't really talk during our journey beyond me taking time to explain everything Kragoff had told us to Phantasma. Phantasma and Chernobog flew above me, forcing me to push my armor as hard as I could, Cadams expanding and contracting like muscles to let me, if not catch up with them, then at least not slow them down too much. We reached the village that we'd seen from the video. Coming to a stop, Chernobog and Phantasma floated to my left and right as I rested my sword on my shoulder. We probably looked like something out of a fantasy RPG, a demon, a wizard, and a knight in black and green armor standing together on a hill. The village was just 3 apartment buildings and a small section that looked like it had been one of those little sections set aside for stores and such. I eyed the military base in the distance. Okay, those who think this guy actually left a bomb unguarded, raise your hands. Suckers bet, Chernobog growled. Phantasma nodded as well. Okay then. In that case, we play this, damn it, I shook my head. No, we can't wait. It's a nuke. We need to take care of it before the others meet Kragoff and he decides to just detonate it with a suicide mandrill or something. Agreed, Phantasma said, floating down toward the village. Chernobog and I followed, the 3 of us making our way to the center. I tried not to show how exhausted I was. Running here was bad enough, but the combat before had been worse. Like cardio on fast forward combined with stress and delirium. I was panting, my muscles were sore, and I was basically running on adrenaline. But there was a nuke. If it went off, innocent people would die. That just wasn't going to happen. I'd seen enough death in Rio. Just one thing, I raised a hand to my ear, activating the quantum comm unit I'd made all those months ago. Team Omega, about to attack. Should we go for it? Creel came on. This is Team Beta, Vanguard is wondering the same thing. For a moment, all was quiet. Then Carlson came on. Team Alpha is ready. Let's do this. With a look at each other, we attacked. As we dived down toward the village, they began to pour out of the buildings. Servitors. Dozens of them, coming from the windows of the apartment buildings, the entrances on the bottom floor, and off the roofs. I flipped the Omnitrix open as I ran, changing through my menu. Most any alien would have been effective, but I decided to use someone new. With a push, my body changed in a millisecond. Brown human skin became orange, with the consistency of stone. My feet became 2-toed, and my hands became 4-fingered. I gained a couple feet in height and hell of a lot of pounds of rock-like muscle. My ears became pointed, my face widened, and my beard flowed to join my hair and become dark brown instead of black. Black armor covered my torso and waist, a Roman-style skirt surrounding my waist. Grendel. I shouted out as I slammed into the ground. With that cry, I roared, feeling energy fill my body like a shot of caffeine direct to my heart. Let's do this. A man, Chernobog grumbled. He can turn into a troll. A plasma shot hit me in the head. I blinked at the bright green light that followed, then wiped off the remains of plasma. I smiled a fang-filled smile. Didn't hurt. More shots hit me, over and over. I roared in happiness, jumping towards a group of servitors. Doesn't hurt, bitches. What a rush. I could feel that I wasn't as powerful as Forearms or even Wrath. But I was durable. With the confidence that brought, I landed in the middle of a pack of servitors. These ones were different, somehow. They were all more human in appearance, with little to no fur, and more recognizable features. One leaped on top of me, grabbing the fur on my chest and stabbing claws at me. I snarled, grabbing him up. Stronger than the others, he seemed to pull at me. I ripped him off anyways, tossed him to the ground, and stomped on his head. The earth spoke behind me, warning of an attack. I spun around, grabbing a fist as it was thrown at me. The gorilla, much bigger than his counterparts from earlier, struggled against my grip. When he threw another punch, I grabbed this one, then wrestled him briefly. Just like Steve had taught me, I dragged him in, twisted him over my hip, then slammed to the ground. Then, just like Nat had taught me, I pressed a foot to his neck and twisted, snapping his neck. Something came out of the sky, surprising the hell out of me as it tackled me to the ground. I laughed with the excitement of the attack, rolling to punch the servitor off of me. I dived back into the group and, I'll be honest, I ended up losing myself a bit. I ripped apart another servitor in my hands, took a fist to my face with a grin, brawled with a gorilla just for the fun of it. The rock troll form I got from Ulick apparently had an effect on my brain. Like wrath, I felt it affecting me, but it was so much more insidious than wrath. Wrath was like cocaine, hitting me immediately with a rush. Grendel was more like eating a pot brownie. The rush came slowly, filling me until I was burning with it. I punched, kicked, and bit my way through my opponents, laughing. Someone was yelling at me, but I ignored them in favor of continuing to have fun. I clawed at the chest of a servitor, ripping chunks of metal off of it, then uppercutting the thing back. Before I could continue rampaging into the army of monsters, taking punches, claws, and plasma shots without a scratch. Before I could continue, something happened. The world faded away into smoke, coming together. I blinked as the smoke coalesced into the image of Phantasma in the middle of a red landscape. Dial, look up and listen, damn it, she shouted with a voice that felt like it was in my brain. Otherwise, the sheer volume would have cracked my eardrums. The world faded back. I felt a mouth biting down on my arm with immense force, but ignored it to listen to the instruction. Dial. When I looked up, Phantasma was above me. We have a job to do. Let him have his fun. Chernobog called behind her, eating his way through opponents. His armor was covered in gore and machine oil, the darkness all smiles the whole time. Nuke, you idiots. Phantasma blocked some plasma shots with her shield, then fired back with a magical bolt that slammed an opponent out of the air. We need to stop the nuke. I blinked up at her, finally realizing what she was talking about. Damn, you're right, I smirked. No need to stop fighting though, I mused. With that, I started rampaging again, this time rushing directly into an apartment building. In there, I found what had to be servitors in the double digits, rushing toward me in the hallways. I grinned, flashing fangs before slamming my fists together. Let's rumble. The monkeys in front of me hit me like a wave, 5 pushing me back. I grunted, grinding my feet on the ground to try and come to a stop, my arms encompassing my opponents. With a shout, I punched one in the face, grabbed another, picked it up, and tossed it into the ceiling, cracking the stone above us. A gorilla joined the mashup. I grabbed by the shoulders and twisted to slam it into the right wall, smashing through the wall. The gorilla, about 3 feet taller and hundreds of pounds heavier than the ones we'd fought in the forest, spun around as we went through the wall, tossing me through the remains of a bedroom to land in the decrepit kitchen, half covered in mold and snow. I broke apart a drawer and tossed it at the gorilla, then jumped upward, slamming my way through the ceiling. Once on the next floor, I began to run. Phantasma had been right. We had a job to do. With that in mind, I took a football charge stance and started running. More plasma bolts hit me, and I could kind of feel them now. Apparently, there was a limit to how durable I was. Good to find out. I grinned and roared my way down the hallway. I shoved aside another servitor, tackled one to the ground and stumped on its head, grabbed a fluorescent bulb off the floor and stabbed it into the heart of another. Picking another monkey, I used it as a shield, making my way down the hall with all the speed I had, until anything in my way was tossed aside or trampled on. The sounds of monkeys shrieking filled my ears like a series of explosions, the servitor I'd lifted up scratching at me while firing shot after shot at my face. There was a window at the end of the hall, one of the few intact ones in the entire building. When I smashed through the window and most of the wall around it, I let out a whoop of joy, the chill air of Russia filling my lungs. Falling down with the servitor beneath me, our impact crushed it under my weight. Crawling to my feet, I kept running, Phantasma and Chernobog just ahead of me. More servitors rushed across the snow, or flew through the air, rushing through the half-destroyed tanks and helicopters around us. I took a massive jump, landing on top of one of the smaller servitors as it crawled on a helicopter. As the former vehicle and current weapon of war were smashed apart under my weight, I grabbed the rusty rotor blade of the helicopter, ripping it off in 2 sections until I had them in my hands like a pair of blades. Rushing forward, I started slicing through servitors, laughing all while. Enjoying yourself? Chernobog asked laughingly, landing behind me to join in. This is just plain fun, the earth spoke to me again, letting me know to duck an attack. I was finding that my connection to the earth was deeper than just being made of it. I mean, I suppose it made sense for a rock troll. Explained how the hell Ulick kept dodging us, if he could sense things on the ground the way I did. Come on. Phantasma said from the door to the massive round bunker. Chernobog and I shared a reluctant look, then ran for the door. We need to dash. Boom, Chernobyl and I slammed our shoulders into the metal door in unison, snapping it open. Inside, I could see some stairs leading deeper inside. Thank you, Phantasma said lightly, rushing in after us. She turned back to block the doors with a shield, straining as she held off the small army outside. Dozens of servitors clawed and shot at the violet mandala, and she gritted her teeth. I can't hold them off for too long. I got it, I said, clapping my hands together and rubbing them. Go. Phantasma nodded, then turned. As she did, I jumped up, slamming my fingers deep into the ceiling. With a pull and a push, the entire ceiling began to crumble. I dropped down as the whole thing began to collapse, rushing down the stairs. Go, 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 the cave-in smashed down over us, forcing us all to book it down as a trio. Phantasma twisted out of the way as I passed her, turning to blast out purple flames from her left hand. They were hot enough that even I could feel it. Hot enough that as it hit the stones falling toward us, the rubble boiled. She grit her teeth and snapped out her other hand with a shout. In a single move, the rubble froze into place, turning it into a rough wall. We all stared at it as the sound of plasma shots and claws impacting stone filled the air above us. Won't hold for long, Phantasma noted. Then we better find the nuke, I growled. Chernobyl sighed. This has been just the best day, you guys. No idea what I was supposed to say to that. Director Maria Hill. Hill shook her head, glaring at the woman in front of her, a woman with dyed blonde hair and glasses wearing a black business suit and blue shirt. The blonde was speaking in Russian and sweating slightly. Maria could see why. Steve and Fury were on either side of her, both wearing casual clothes, Fury glaring at the woman along with Maria, while Steve was more neutral, though Steve had the benefit of his powerful demeanor to help. Apparently, that was enough to make the woman panicky, which meant she was a lapdog, forced to come by with the paperwork and read off the proposal, which meant the Russians were scared. Maria was angry, so the Russian politicians didn't all suddenly have their heads up their asses. The doors to Maria's office suddenly opened. The woman squeaked, startled, while Steve, Maria, and Fury sighed in unison. Tony strode in confidently. He eyed the woman. Huh, you are clearly under a lot of stress. You should have a drink. With that, he strode up to the bar nearby. Steve was about to say, I warned you about this, Tony said to Fury and Maria. About what? Fury said with a cocked eyebrow. Crimson Dynamo. He poured out a drink as he spoke, walking over to the woman. I mean, it was bad enough when it was just me and Rhodey, but now that we've got so many people running around in the low-rent stuff, of course, everyone else is trying to cramp my style. I mean, it was bad enough when they were screwing up all over the world and I had to show it during that trial forever ago. Those poor people, Steve winced. Screw those guys. Tony passed the woman a glass, the terrified Russian woman taking it gratefully. Important thing is that once again, I was right, and once again, true genius goes unappreciated. Tony, Maria said firmly. We were in the middle of something. I believe I told you to come when you had something. I do. Tony walked over to stand behind the desk with Maria. I read the deal. I say we take it. With some modifications, sure. See, we need more. And I can think of a couple of things we could use. He tapped at Maria's desk, bringing up the files in question. Before them, Tony's revised version of the file. What do you think? Maria read it over. Then she nodded. Fine. I won't shoot you today. And once again, I survived despite destiny, Tony chuckled. By the way, Thor is still raging. Really? Steve asked, sounding amazed. He's been at it since he saw the bad guy from Ferngully rushing around with our lesser selves. Tony scoffed. Hell, I'm still surprised you aren't mad. I don't really care as much, Steve said with a raised eyebrow. The Russian woman sank down in her seat as she started to realize how ignored she was. Yeah, well I do, Tony scowled. I don't know who the guy cramping my style is, but I'm tempted to fly over to Russia and have a party. That doesn't sound like a threat, Steve frowned. Steve, you've seen the kind of chaos I can cause at a good party, Tony said with a wide grin. Maria raised a hand, stopping their banter. This deal will work. If you can meet our own demands, we'll be able to, if not overlook this, then at least use it to our advantage. The Russian woman gulped. Okay, I will hurry and call. Please do, Tony said with a grin. You've got a deadline though. The unforgiving looks she got had her rushing out of the door. Chapter 113, Nuke, Part 2. Phil Coulson. Coulson, Sky, May, Galena, Fitzsimmons, and Craven all stared down at the building in the distance. It was a two-story complex, with decrepit hulks of trains all about, rusted rails covered in snow, and windows blown out by time. Kragoff's servitors were roaming the complex. A bunch of robot monkeys hopping on top of rusted trains, flying through the air, and roaming around the tracks. It should have looked ridiculous. But dozens of primates covered in metal and able to shoot plasma was kind of terrifying. You never realized how big and strong a gorilla or chimp was. Coulson put aside the thought, for the millionth time, of what a weird mess his life had become. He looked at the others. What do we got? Enough of an army to cover the entire area? May answered Coulson, lowering the binoculars in her hand with a sigh. Not quite, Craven said. He makes it seem like that. But watch how they move. He's there, or at least has the nearest entrance to him there. Okay, I got nothing, Crocodile Dundee, Sky said after a moment of watching. First, I take that as a compliment. Craven flipped his Bowie knife in his hand with a smirk. Girl, take a look. He stepped forward to kneel, eyeing the army below. When a herd moves like this, it's because they want to hide their individuality. To keep predators like us from picking out the weaknesses, constantly shifting to hide their vulnerabilities. This Ivan has hidden himself behind a facade. But any careful person, there, he pointed, trailing his hands along. Kragoff has patrols going past one particular spot in a perfect sequence. As long as we can follow it dash. It looks random, Fitz mumbled. No, he's right. Simmons said excitedly. Without meaning to, she moved forward to kneel next to Craven, who looked surprised. If we follow it. She bit her bottom lip and traced her finger. Then Kragoff is there. And following the same traits found in Herd's dash. So he's not a crazy nutbag? Sky asked curiously. Craven knows what he's doing, Galena clinked as she moved forward slightly. The logic is sound. Simmons looked up at Carlson. He crossed his arms and swayed in place for a moment. We don't have much time. Creel and the others are going to intercept the army soon. So we need to move at the same time. If I'm right, they're thinking the same thing. If all goes well dash. Over Sky's comm unit, the sound of Dial's voice was projected. Team Omega, about to attack. Should we go for it? Creel came on. This is Team Beta. Vanguard is wondering the same thing. Carlson looked at Craven. You're sure about this, right? Craven scowled, about to speak before Simmons cut him off. Sir, it makes perfect sense. Craven gave her an oddly appreciative look, then nodded. I have experience. Not just in hunting animals, but in assaulting military bases and poacher camps. Humans are just animals who have lost their way, Carlson. And every animal is at its purest when it comes to a fight. Follow me, kill what you have to, but keep on moving. Fitzsimmons will be in the center, Sky, you and I lead, May and Galena following. Carlson mused on that. Then he nodded, looking at Sky. May I? Sure thing, boss. Sky held out her right hand, Carlson awkwardly uncrossing his arms to talk into her wrist armor. Team Alpha is ready. Let's do this. Wait, Craven frowned. We need a distraction. If we simply rush in, we'll get overwhelmed. We need someone to cause the distraction, to make sure if we do get spotted while we go after him. I'll do it, Galena said immediately. No, Carlson shook his head. We need someone to cause a distraction, then sneak over to join us again. And you aren't exactly sneaky, no offense. Galena said something caustic in the roughest of language. I have to go, Sky said softly. Everyone turned to look at her. What? My armor is made to be able to sneak around quietly and I can make a hell of a noise if I have to. You guys wait for me to make the distraction, then go in. I'll fly after you guys. Then we'll have mostly internal forces to deal with. May stood in military stance. I suggest we cause a distraction for those as well. Our goal is Kragoff. Fighting the soldiers he's got isn't as important as getting to wherever he's controlling them. Then that is my job, Galena said. Again, you'd need to sneak back to dash Carlson began to say. No, I don't, Galena growled. I will simply fight them. You don't need me inside, Carlson. Sky, Fitz, and Simmons will aid you. I can stay outside and kill as many as possible. There are hundreds of servitors, May noted. Good for them. I'll give them a cookie, Galena said blandly. Carlson smirked. Yeesh. Kids, right. Craven and May smirked as well. Okay then. Sky will do the first distraction, sneak away, then Galena will do the second. Agreed. Nodding, the two girls in power armor flew off. Moments later, the sound of plasma bolts filled the air. The small army below them spun, then ran in the direction of the shots. A large portion of servitor sent up dust and snow as leaped over rusted over trains and flew into the trees, leaving only a small amount behind. Go, now. Craven immediately rushed forward, everyone following as he had suggested. They ran through the snow and dirt as a group, charging forward. Using bushes and hulks for cover, Craven led them along. Carlson found it funny that somehow, Craven kept leading them to sneak up behind enemies to kill. I really need to my hands on one of those Model 2 guns. Carlson whispered as he snuck alongside the others, firing his silenced Glock, the loud shots mixing with the plasma fire in the forest to make his shots tough to track. Considering all the insane alien weaponry and tech he dealt with on a daily basis, he couldn't be blamed for the thought that a simple pistol just wasn't cutting it anymore. No need. Craven jumped like a panther, slicing out the jugular of an ape, then twisting in the air to grab it and force it to the ground, stabbing it in the brain. No matter the battlefield, a knife will have its place. The super strength and speed probably help, May grumbled, joining Carlson in firing a simple pistol at her opponents. Use the trains for cover. Already doing it. Simmons whispered, sounding panicky. I'm officially sick of monkeys. Fitz mumbled, groaning as he joined the others. They made their way to the door Craven had indicated, the jungle fighter guiding them in his killing spree. Honestly, between May and Craven, it was tough to tell who was deadlier. It was like comparing a predator to a killing machine. While Craven was efficient, he was also passionate. He had a wide smile on his face as he sliced and killed, like his life had found completion. May was unmoved. She had a job to do, did it, and moved on. Both were intimidating to Carlson for multiple reasons. Though May was far more fun to watch for him personally. They made it to the door, which was guarded by two gorillas. Hiding behind a train, Craven looked over at the gorillas. Okay, can you take care of the lie dash? May shot out the lights. Craven grunted in satisfaction, the gorillas roaring in confusion. He and May rushed forward through the darkness and struck as one. Craven leapt onto a gorilla, bringing it to the ground and stabbing it in the right eye. He backflipped out of the way of a swipe, then leapt back in to stab his opponent in the heart, twisting his blade with a savage smile. May, on the other hand, backflipped onto it and shot it in the power couplings that Fitz had marked for her. With both guards gone, the group entered through the door, Simmons reaching for her comm unit. Sky, we're good. They all waited for a breathless moment. On my way. Sky dropped out of the sky with surprisingly little noise, landing in front of them. Carlson had to fight down his worry for her. The warrior hacker was covered in plasma burns and looked as though she was in pain as she walked through the door. No one said anything as she joined them, Carlson focusing on the job. Okay, Galina. Hit M. Crimson Dynamo / Galina Nemirovsky. That was all Galina needed. She'd been standing behind Kragoff's base, waiting in the woods with bated breath, almost bouncing in her armor. She raised her arms to cock them at her hips. Her chest opened up as electricity passed over her arms and legs to gather at her chest. In the center of her chest where the plates of her armor slid open, revealing a spinning orb of light. Dobre Oitro Psycha. With that triumphant cry, the energy in her chest began to fire. An ion cannon, a weapon that used electrical charges to fire particles with immense speed and force. Fiction often displayed such weapons, from Star Wars to Command and Conquer. It was just as powerful as you would expect and a true show of her genius. The beam tore through several trees, ripped the dirt in its passing while melting the snow and turning loose granules to glass, and shone so brightly it illuminated the whole train yard as though a blue sun had appeared in the sky. When the beam hit the building, it dusted the concrete wall, and most of the hallway behind it, a portion of the ceiling, over and over until it went through the other side of the building. Galina smirked at the loud sounds of alarm that followed, various primates shouting and shrieking as they all rushed her. What the fuck, Galina? Sky shouted over comms. Warn us next time. Craven yelled in agreement. That was incredible. Fitzsimmons said in unison, bringing a smile to Galina's face without her realizing. Galina ignited her jets, lifting herself into the air. She growled, lifting her arms up to prepare for the fight. The ion cannon shot, powerful as it was, still caused a noticeable drop in her power reserves. She grit her teeth. Carlson, you have your second distraction. Now make it count. Apes flew and ran towards her as she blasted forth twin bolts of lightning, eyes hardened in rage. Nikolai Krylenko / Vanguard. Vanguard was in the driver's seat of Lola, Mikhail was in the passenger seat, and Creel was standing on the hood, his form changed to match the red of Lola's metal. Vanguard was shouting into a walkie-talkie that came with the car. Yes, evacuate the entirety of the area. Vanguard said to his superiors in Moscow. We have a team getting ready to dismantle or stop the bomb, but we can't risk him detonating it prematurely. He twisted the steering wheel of Lola. Dozens of feet below, an army of vehicles and servitors were tearing across the landscape, sending up plumes of snow. Vanguard brought the car over the army and pressed a button. Bullets flew from the car's headlight machine guns, ripping into the army, which fought back as well. Creel and Mikhail dived down together, their forms rippling into shining metal and brown fur, respectively. When they hit the ground, they immediately began to unleash hell. Claws and fists began to rip apart monkey flesh. Creel grabbed a jeep and tossed it into the air, the occupants falling to the ground. Mikhail was in a duel with the bigger apes, roaring in rage. In the meantime, Boris had apparently grabbed the radio from the terrified man who had been speaking to Vanguard. Nikolai, we're running operations to evacuate every town and village we can. Have the reinforcements arrived? Vanguard eyed the horizon. Soon, a smile came to his face. A group of tanks came over the horizon. Smaller dots walked alongside them. They're here. I'm going to meet them. Good. You have full command over them. In the background, someone shouted in protest. Boris snarled. Really? We are fighting goddamn killer monkey robots. Let my team do their job you. Debil Gazial, someone shouted again. Oh, taking my job are you? Come here? No, come here. Loud noises that sounded suspiciously like a metal briefcase hitting a skull came from the radio, Boris yelling all the while. You have full command Nikolai? Defend our country. Vanguard smirked. Boris was a politician. But he'd also been a soldier once. Time like this were a good reminder of that. Understood. Twisting the flying car around, Vanguard flew it over to the army in question. Twisting, he heading to where the man in command would be, noting the formation they'd taken. An older one. Battles on open fields hadn't been a thing in warfare for a while, so it was good they were using the old methods. Vanguard used his knowledge of old Russian military tactics to guide him, coming in low. A man stood on top of a tank, looking up at Vanguard as he came in. Looks like your new ride has had better days, Vanguard, the soldier cried up to him. Lola hiccuped slightly, the poor dear shuddering in the air. I'm borrowing it, Vanguard admitted. You have your orders. Monkeys, the man standing confidently on the tank spat to the side. Robots. Whatever. We're here to fight. Vanguard smirked under his mask. Had to respect a soldier. Vanguard parked the car behind the main line, then got on top of the tank next to the soldier in command, taking a comm unit from the man and linking it to the one Galina made for him. Thinking of the comm unit she'd made for him reminded Nikolai of Galina and Dial's recent obsession. He shook his head and smirked. Drive us closer, Commander. I want to hit them with my shield. The tanks and soldiers charged to meet the apes. Bullets began flying. The apes responded as well, the tanks stopping at range to fire on the vehicles and guerrillas as the soldiers found what cover they could. Vanguard blocked a shot from a guerrilla cannon on his shield. One soldier was shot in the chest, plasma flash boiling the liquid inside him to tear the poor man apart. Vanguard grit his teeth in anger but kept his focus on the battle. Yelling into his comm unit, he felt his eyes flicker from moment to moment, death and destruction all around him. Cover the left flank. Our enhanced units are on the right, we can afford to send less soldiers there. Tanks, stop shooting the small fry, we need to take out the heavy units. The second they came close enough, he got into the fray himself. Slamming the pointed tip of his shield into one chimp, he ducked under another, punched it in the chin, then twisted in a spinning kick to knock another over. The tank turret spun around, forcing Vanguard to duck under its cannon as it passed overhead. As he came back up, he backflipped through the air, landing among the other apes to start throwing punches again. The battle became thick with blood, a tank exploded, and another one fired. Vanguard defended a man, only to stop when he realized that man was Creel. The men shared a brief look. Then they stood back to back and started fighting. Mikhail roared past using his claws to capture a chimp and rip it in half. More and more servitors charged. More men died. Vanguard grit his teeth, back to back with a man he didn't trust, calling commands all the while. Team Alpha needed to finish fast, or else they'd lose purely by exhaustion. Mahmoud /dial. We went down the stairs slowly, me in the lead, Chernobog, and Phantasma behind. Chernobog was having trouble with the stairs however. His big feet were just too large for the stairs, leaving him grumbling as he had to keep adjusting to keep from falling on his face. Finally he just floated off the floor and followed that way. For some reason, despite also having giant feet, I didn't seem to have any trouble at all. As long as some part of my feet were touching stone, I was fine. It was a subtle ability, but useful in terms of my balance. At the bottom of the set of stairs was a series of different hallways. We looked around at them. There were 6. I could see down each of them, with the large amount of paint peeling off the walls to make each of them look more like a trail through a forest rather than a stone hall. A light from behind me drew my attention. Chernobog and I turned to see Phantasma raising a hand covered in a purple glove of magic and a white light in her palm. Sorry, she said with a wince. I didn't bring a flashlight. Where would you even put one? Chernobog said, shooting a look at her clothes. She glowered at him. What? That's a fair question. I mean, I was about to say, only to get glared at as well. I blinked. I didn't realize it was dark, to be honest. I have perfect night vision in this form. Of course you do, you're a rock troll, Chernobog said with a grunt. You aren't named that just because you're as dumb as one. I scowled, then focused on the job in front of me. Okay, which way? Phantasma looked around. We can't just guess. We have to be sure. I thought about that. Rock troll. I tested the form before, but apparently testing it in a lab setting was less helpful than I thought. But Chernobog had said my night vision was to be expected. Because I was a rock troll? Why? I walked up to one hall. Working on instinct, I closed my eyes. I could feel the earth speak to me again. Well, not speak. In some sense, it was like a very low-key version of Swamp Fire's power to talk to plants. Stone and dirt didn't have any sort of life. But I could read vibrations and shifts in the earth like it was a language. Following that, I walked around for a moment. The image we had seen when Kragoff sent the video through that orangutan had been of a cavernous room. So we were looking for an empty space of that size, with a big metal bomb in the center, maybe defended by more apes. I felt it after a moment. Something sang to my senses, told me that was what I was looking for. The closest equivalent, at least. This way, I said, walking down a seemingly random hallway. Are you sure? Phantasma asked. Nope, I admitted freely. But if we're going down a random hallway anyways, it might as well be the one that feels right. I'll trust my troll instincts over chance. We all walked down the hallway together. Every once in a while we'd come to another set of halls and I'd take one after a moment of thought. We made our way down the disgusting halls, stepping over debris and peeled off paint. This place could use a decorator, I mused. What, you don't think Kragoff has a monkey just for the purpose? Chernobog said sarcastically. Why monkeys anyway? Phantasma mumbled. Hey, everybody has their own thing, I shrugged. Tony has his suits, some people have robotic tentacles, Kragoff has monkeys and apes. We stopped in a room, a big oval lobby type of place. Shattered glass rested on the floor along with destroyed sections of the furniture. Moss was everywhere and the whole place had a disgusting slimy feel to it. I stopped. We've got incoming. As I said that, in the hallways around us, flickering green lights came to life in the darkness, followed by the sound of heavy breathing. Only 4 of them though. That surprised me. After an army popping up every time, I could only feel a few. One of the 4 stepped out of the shadows, striding toward us. Kragoff was carrying a cane, stepped toward us in that calm and measured manner that Fury had perfected. The man was just like we'd seen him before, balding at the top of his head with long strands of his remaining hair falling to his shoulders. His eyes were hard, flinty I guess you could say, and he was frowning like we were unruly students in his classroom. He wore an old military uniform under a red winter coat that made him look even more severe as he stared at the 3 of us. Sup, I said instantly. He sneered, speaking in Russian. Leave. Now. We all shared a look. He sneered a bit more. I knew you wouldn't listen. That someone would be sent to disrupt the bomb. It is why I am here. To give you a final chance. You foolish children have no chance, he snapped his fingers. 3 beings came from the shadows. One was a gorilla, but it dwarfed all the others that had come before, standing even taller than Chernobog. It was covered in brown armor of steel across its chest, back, and arms, and his eyes glowed red. The guy looked like King Kong shrunk to barely fit in a building and somehow became ripped. The armor on his arms glowed a slight white, like they were surrounded in energy. The second was a baboon about the size of a human. He had armor that looked almost loose, gray in color with larger sections along his back. The armor suddenly shrank to become skin-tight, with the looser sections flowing to become wings. It wasn't Cadams or nanotech or anything, but it was advanced. The last one was another orangutan. It was floating in the air, electricity floating about armor sections on the arms and legs, with metal slowly circling it like lightweight magneto. You see, while my creations are quite powerful, none of them can match my pride and joys. My 3 original designs. Miklho, the gorilla growled. Igor, the baboon flew up on wings of metal. Pyotr, the orangutan raised a fist as steel circled it in the air even faster. Prevent them from disabling the bomb. I will deal with their allies. Kragov faded to nothing. A hologram. The gorilla rushed forward with a deafening roar. Chernobog laughed. Come on, Furious George, show me what you got. The two met in the middle with immense force, spinning into a kiosk that might have once held a board secretary and turned ancient office supplies to rubble. Chernobog reached out for the gorilla, Miklho I guess, and pressed his claws to the gorilla's chest. Presumably to simply rip his heart/soul out and end the fight. Glowing white energy that erupted at the point of contact stopped him in his tracks. Oh, Chernobog clawed at the gorilla's chest again, only for the white energy to become a bright flash of light, strong enough that even Phantasma and I were almost blinded and probably would have been had it been aimed our way. Chernobog, much closer in proximity, roared. Ah, you absolute fuck. Chernobog stumbled back in pain, his shadowy form flickering. The gorilla raised a fist and promptly socked Chernobog in the face, sending the dark god through a wall. Apparently Kragov had more tricks up his sleeves. The orangutan, Pyotr, rushed Phantasma, flying on currents of lightning while swinging his arms forward, small metal spikes flung towards her. Phantasma floated up and backward, raising her arms to create a mandala shield in front of her. She grit her teeth as the metal shards bounced off her shield only to fly back and hit the shield again. She fired a magical beam, only for the monkey to raise and combine metal shards together to block the beam. While those two had a duel in the air between metal and magic, the baboon, Igor, stared at me. Nonplussed by the intense glare, I hesitantly spoke. So, how you doing? You wanna fight or dash? Igor rushed forward before I could finish. His armor flowed to surround his hands to become 2 long sword blades, slashing at me. I raised my hands and blocked the swords on my forearms, tried to front kick at the baboon. He spun out of the way, then slammed his blades against me again, getting me in the chin. God damn it. I swung at the thing, only to miss. One day, I'm going to meet a bad guy who responds to me being nice to them in a good way. Rake, the baboon's armor on his fists grew to become massive mallets, the monkey punching me back into a wall. Okay then. Apparently he was too fast for me to hit. The baboon flipped over another punch, punched me again, stabbed at me with a sword hand, flew up on shapeshifted wings and dropped behind me to punch me again. And he was a shapeshifter. I mean, technically his weird as hell armor was shapeshifting, but it was fucking with me either way. What had Hawkeye told me all that time ago in Rio? That I held back with the watch? Well, a nuke was a good time to unleash everything I had. Before I could do anything to that effect, the baboon's fingers became 5 long claws. He slashed at me and I blocked it on my arm again. He got through my skin this time, slicing into my flesh. I shouted in rage, stepping back. I glared at the deep red cuts. Rude. Then, before I could say anything else, the cuts stopped bleeding at a very fast pace, enough that I noticed it. Neat. Cool. Grendel had Regan. With that in mind, I had to change forms if I wanted to touch this guy. I slapped the Omnitrix symbol on my chest. Fur and flesh went from orange to blue, and I lost hundreds of pounds of weight in favor of a more svelte form. Fast track. Shapeshifting is my game, asshole, I said with smirk, rushing forward. And I'm the master of this universe. Until someone else showed up at least. Igor the baboon swung long claws at me as I sped toward him. I slipped around his slash with ease and punched him in the face while running past, basically clotheslining the thing. He ran back around, ready to attack, only for Igor to try to escape by forming wings on his back again and flying upward. I ran forward at full speed, then jumped. In a flash of green, my form shifted again, fur being replaced by orange scales. Astrodactyl. Squawk. I blasted forward, my organic jetpack using star power to send me into Igor. We smashed into the ceiling in a crater-making impact. Crack. Igor snarled, flashing fangs at me, then slashing out. I dived back to hover with my wings and fired a blast of green power from my mouth. Igor shapeshifted a large shield out of his armor, which took the blast. I made a whip from my left arm and slashed outward with it, catching the ape by the foot. Igor tried to swipe at the whip with a sword, but I pulled as hard as I could. Squawk. Shout out to Wonder Woman. I joked while spinning around in a circle, pulling the baboon around with me. Swinging him outward, I let go of the whip to send him flying into the ground. I shifted again as I rocketed toward Igor, the baboon still dazed from the impact. Forearms. still shooting at the ground with the force of Astrodactyl. A full ton of Tetraman slammed into the ground fist first and shattered Igor's attempt at a shield. My 4 fists slammed into Baboon Flash, then through it, the sheer force of my impact cratering the ground and sending the corpse flying. I told you, universe is best. I crowed. Just as I said that, Phantasma and the Magneto ape flew by. I leapt after them, ignoring the corpse of Igor to try and grab his orangutan buddy as he kept trying to kill my new friend. I shifted in midair. Swamp fire. Still shooting forward on the propulsion of forearms leg muscles, I hit the orangutan hard, wrapping a hand around his face to start punching him. Okay, enraged, the orange-furred ape surrounded himself in blue electricity. I took the current to my system and fought through it, ready to unleash fire, only for metal blades to start slashing at me. A small storm surrounded me when just a few blades didn't dissuade me for trying to break the giant orangutan's ribs. My arms were torn off, my head was ripped in half, my heart was torn to pieces. I was basically the literal interpretation of every country love song. Dial. Phantasma shrieked in horror. I grit my non-existent teeth and regenerated, grabbing the orangutan with my left hand as my arms regrew, my plant fingers wrapping around furry legs. Swamp fire wasn't about to die just from being torn to pieces. I'm good, let's do this. My right hand grew back as I lifted it up. I unleashed fire from my palm, engulfing the insane cyber monkey. The orangutan snarled. Didn't know these guys can snarl. A metal wall of razor-sharp metal blocked my fire. With all that metal blocking me, it let Phantasma strike. She unleashed a bolt of violet magic, sending him to the ground as I let go. Phantasma and I landed side by side, both of us raising our arms to aim at the orangutan. We released blasts of fire and magic at the same time, the orangutan shrieking in rage as he was torn apart. After a few long moments where metal around us shook, he finally stilled. Before we could relish in our win, Chernobyl roared to our right. Spinning around, we watched a gorilla carried along by a ballistic Xerox machine go flying past us, bouncing along the ground to roll back onto his feet. I stared at the giant hunk of Soviet-era steel and plastic that had been used to launch a 20-foot-tall gorilla across a room. Printer. I ran out of desks and old-school printers are giant fucks, Chernobyl growled, stumbling toward us. He looked pissed. Like, amazingly pissed off. His armor was scratched and beaten, practically destroyed, with pieces falling off. You, want some help? I asked curiously. He growled low and hard, striding past us. No, I'm killing him now. With that, the shadowy demon stalked toward his prey. When the gorilla rose, the beast roared, swinging a fist at Chernobyl. Chernobyl ducked under it, responding with an uppercut that sent the gorilla stumbling back. The white energy around the gorilla glowed again, only for Chernobyl to grab a section of floor from the crater forearms left behind and blocked the flash of light, smashing the gorilla with the concrete right after. No more tricks. The two locked arms, shadows, and gorilla flash struggling. The gorilla roared, flecks of spit landing on Chernobyl's face. Chernobyl roared as well, slowly overpowering his opponent and forced the gorilla's back to the wall. No more magic. Chernobyl reared back his head, then slammed his helmeted head against the gorilla's. The helmet shattered with the impact, dispersing into flecks of black ash. The gorilla's nose and jaw shattered, blood spilling on the dusty floor, dripping down black fur, splattering both of their armor. Chernobyl used his opponent's daze to snarl in his face. Know this ape. He grabbed the gorilla and lifted him up into the air above his head, slamming him into the ceiling. 20 feet and thousands of pounds of mountain gorilla and armor lifted right off the ground. Then, as Phantasma and I watched in stunned silence, he put his hands to the gorilla's waist. The sound of flesh and metal beginning to tear slowly filled the room. I am Chernobyl. I am the Black God. Shadows in the room lengthened. The horrific sound of a gorilla shrieking in fear and pain bounced off the walls. With one vicious pull, Chernobyl pulled hard. Skin and steel ripped apart in a line at the gorilla's waist. Muscle split with a disgusting sound. Bones shattered, spinal fluids mixing with the fluids. Another vicious tug, Chernobyl ripped the gorilla in half. I am the strongest god there is. Chernobyl roared in glee, tossing aside the halves to the ground as he was soaked in the blood of his opponent. The gorilla was still. Then, the upper half slowly tried to force itself to move, fingers clenching slowly. It gaped at us. It reached for us. Anger was still in its gaze. Even after all that, it was still trying to kill us. Then a massive foot slammed into the thing's head, shattering it apart. Chernobyl raised his hands and released a primal sound, before eyeing us. For a tense moment, I thought he might turn on us. I love my job, he said in satisfaction. Clearly, I said as dryly as I could. Phantasma held a hand over her mouth, then shook her head, turning to the hallway. Chapter 114, NRG. Phil Coulson / currently horrified. Coulson stared at the screen in front of him. On entering the facility with the others, Sky had immediately found the connection to the various cameras that Kragoff was using to keep an eye on his forces, putting the ones that would have seen Coulson's little group in a loop and giving them a look at their allies. She'd been projecting 2 holoscreens at regular intervals as they ran, making sure they could see their allies. Allies. Tough to consider. Vanguard, Mikhail, and Creel had joined the Russian military in the offensive battle against the Servitors, and were doing a good job of it. Meanwhile, Phantasma, Dial, and Chernobyl had fought Kragoff's little pet projects. Well, Dial and Phantasma had done a solid job, Dial quick-shifting between alien forms while Phantasma had worked well with him. But then, Chernobog had just, God. Carlson looked away from the screen at the rest of the group with him. Skye was getting patted on the back by Simmons after she had ejected the remains of her lunch in the corner, the British girl looking horrified as well. Fitz was still trying to make a computer in the corner give up its secrets, but he too looked pale. May and Craven were both unmoved. But then, they had experienced worse. Carlson breathed in, then walked up to Skye. She spat out at the ground, looked up at him, then hesitantly nodded to show she was ready to keep going, her faceplate coming down. Good girl. Helping her up, Carlson watched her walk over to the computer to assist Fitz and took another deep breath of air. Whatever happened, this mission would have one hell of a report. Skye seemed to calm down as she and Fitz worked. Okay, we can upload the virus, maybe shut down some of the apes. You don't have to do it from a central computer or something. Carlson asked. Maybe in the movies, Fitz said softly. Yeah. These computers are all networked to the same thing, since, they kind of have to be so that they're functional for Kragoff, Skye explained. We should still find him, Craven said firmly. I have orders to attempt to capture him. Capture? Simmons asked. Craven gave her a respectful nod. They want to use the filthy if they can. Something about hunting down his suppliers. Personally, I disapprove, but that's what I've been told to do, he said with a shrug. Carlson thought on that. Made sense. Granted, there might have been an alternative motive. Kragoff had made a hell of an army. In terms of power, only the exceptional abilities and skills of Carlson's own people and the Winter Guard had saved them. Most armies would have been torn apart, and he could see some in the Russian government being interested in that. Hell, Bridge would be interested on at least some level. He left aside that thought for now. How long will it take for the virus to upload? The computer shut off, along with the lights for a few feet around them. A little longer, now, Skye said with a wince. I think he turned off the power. Then we need to go after him either way, May noted. Let's go then, Carlson said firmly. Galena can't hold off an army forever. They took off down the halls, making their way to the center of the base. They encountered no resistance along the way, which unnerved Carlson more than he showed. This whole thing was unnerving. Honestly, when he'd met Tony, he thought that was as weird as things would get. A rich spoiled weapons developer suddenly developing power armor miles ahead of any weapon on Earth. And now he was walking along with his 3 protégés, one in power armor of her own, his best friend, the world's greatest hunter, while helping a bunch of super strong beings fight an army of monkey robots. Skye leading the way, they came to a pair of doors. Back when the train yard had been active, the doors would have led to the room that those in charge of keeping it running smoothly would have used as their command center. Now, in some ways, it had returned to its purpose in a sad way. A train yard once again being used to send machines out across the world by a conductor. They took positions alongside the doors. May and Carlson shared a look, then nodded at Skye and Craven. The hacker and hunter nodded back. Skye moved in front of the door, took a deep breath, then kicked the doors open hard, sending them flying inwards. The group rushed in. Fitzsimmons waiting outside while May, Skye, Craven, and Carlson raised their guns. The room had been ripped apart and rebuilt. A large computer took up the center of the room, on with a dozen different screens surrounding it in a circle and a single desk with another computer monitor resting on it. And all around it were parts. On the right, where there might have once been desks and chairs, there were instead a bunch of tanks. They were orbs being held in the air by metal struts embedded in the floor, the orbs of glass filled with blue fluid and pieces of flesh. Dozens of tanks, at random intervals, like a forest made of trees filled with flesh. On the left were dozens of tables. Small monkey servitors were roaming around the tables, their arms replaced with metal tools of various types. As they stood there, one of the monkeys hopped on a table covered in flesh and robotic limbs. It pulled an arm to a shoulder and began putting them together with mechanical efficiency. More monkeys were doing the same, putting together servitors together like some sickening version of Santa's workshop. Kragoff stood in the center of the mess, carrying a small pistol loosely in one hand. He was scowling up at them from the center of the room, eyes hard. Otherwise, he did not move. So, you came, despite my warnings. Like all Americans, you prove hopelessly stupid. Fitz, Simmons, and Craven all raised eyebrows of varying types. Skye, eyes him, Carlson said simply. One of Skye's shoulder mechanisms popped to reveal her turret gun. It fired a single ICER, the ammunition Fitzsimmons had created to carry a chemical designed to knock out any opponent with a specialized tranquilize. At Kragoff, the small bullet flying in the space between them in less than a second. Kragoff flickered as the bullet passed through him, hitting a monitor behind him instead. Hologram? Fitz asked behind them. Kragoff lifted his gun and started firing very real bullets. Nope. Simmons yelped, ducking along with the others. Craven leaped forward while ducking another shot and slashed out at Kragoff, only for Kragoff to flicker again, letting the hunter pass through him, then firing at his back. Craven took a bullet to his back, only to growl and duck behind a desk as the bullet fell, revealing his vest was apparently bulletproof to some degree. None of you will stop this. Kragoff flickered again and again when Skye, May, and Carlson shot at him, ICERs, plasma shots, and bullets passing through uselessly. Russia will rise. Mahmoud Sheikh /Dial. We ran down the hallway as a group, not saying a word. Except for Chernobog. who I think was still trying to freak us out, cause he kept licking the ape blood off of himself while giggling. Seriously, the dude was such an asshole troll. We came upon the big room from the footage Kragoff had streamed. I stared at the bomb in the center, just as large as it had seemed in the footage. A small monkey with wings rested on top of it, a hologram emitter resting on its back. Apparently, that had been what Kragoff had used to project his image, explaining why my Grendel form had sensed 4 life forms in the area. Phantasma immediately fired a magical bolt at it, turning it to ash. We ran down the steps to surround the bomb. Okay, now we need to stop it. And I'm all out of time. I gestured to the Omnitrix, which was red. Chernobog, can you eat this thing? Maybe, he mumbled, looking over it. But which part? I don't want to risk triggering it early. I mean, I don't really care if it explodes, but it would be embarrassing. The sounds of hooting and running drew our attention to the entrance. Hundreds of monkey paws on asphalt filled the air. Looks like our friends upstairs have dug through the rubble, Phantasma said grimly. I, meanwhile, got an alert from my suit. My helmet snapped into place around my head, and my HUD lit up. Ah, shit, I said as the sight of my Geiger counter beginning to bounce came to my attention. Yeah, I felt it, Chernobog said. This thing is leaky. Tastes kinda good, but it's probably not great for you. Radiation. Phantasma said with worry. You ever have one of those moments where your mind catches up with reality? Cause one of those moments should never be when a leaky nuclear bomb is in front of you and you have an army of onrushing servitors at your back. Phantasma walked up to stand at my right as we faced the door. Are you going to be okay? I can shield you with magic, to protect you from the radiation. I was about to say yes when the army of servitors came in. I ripped my sword from my side and raised it to fight. The door was too small to really allow a huge number of servitors all coming in at once, but they still came at us 5 at a time. I cut one down with the thrusting technique May had taught me on the bus all that time ago. Chernobog roared as he slapped another one aside to bite another, and Phantasma blasted the last. But they didn't stop there. More and more came in, several of the apes shooting at us. I winced in pain when a shot hit me in the chest, then got tackled onto the floor by another one, who clawed at me. I slashed at the guy with my sword, rolled to my feet to chop an arm off another, and took yet another plasma shot to my left side, the atoms of my armor melting together and casting themselves off to keep me from cooking in my own armor. We stood there as a trio, fighting as fiercely as we could against the army, and that was when the bomb began to beep. I'd have frozen if I hadn't gotten shot in the leg. Fuck, really? I sliced another head off. All at once. Of fucking course. Chernobog roared in agreement. Then the Omnitrix beeped green. I grabbed a servitor and pulled the snarling monkey close, wrapping my arms around it to use as a shield. I raised the Omnitrix high and started flipping through the menu as fast as I could. Come on, jury rig. Another plasma shot hit the servitor in my hands, killing it. I slapped down on the Omnitrix the second I saw jury rig. As the servitors rushed through the door, I disappeared in a flash of green light. Gray armor flowed across my body. As the hefty metal clasped over my form, I felt tingles across my body. My limbs and chest felt like I was disintegrating and coming together all at once. I roared as my form was fully covered by dark metal, the kind that could block all radiation. NRG. I stared down at myself. Okay, so this told me 2 things. First, slapping the Omnitrix never ended in the right alien, though in this case it had turned out awesomely. Secondly, Clint was right. I really did need to trust the Omnitrix more. Much like the TARDIS, it may not have given me what I wanted, but it did give me what I needed since this form was much better given the situation. As I thought about, another plasma bolt hit me. It didn't do a thing to my tough metal armor, a suit that was tough enough to survive a hell of a lot more than that. A servitor leaped onto my chest and scratched at my helmet. I grabbed and smashed the servitor to the ground with my right hand, caving in the thing's chest with pure strength. I let loose with a beam of nuclear energy from the slits in my helmet, sweeping it across the wall of enemies before us. Flesh ignited and metal melted in moments. I then turned to the bomb. I could feel the energy from it resonating with me. I looked at Phantasma. Phantasma, there's about to be a hell of a lot more radiation? Raise a shield, now. Phantasma gave me an odd look for some reason when I spoke, but floated up and made her purple shields, surrounding herself in a orb. Chernobog was chuckling for some reason. The second I was sure Phantasma was safe, I reached for my helmet, grabbed it by the grill and pulled it back. If there was a Geiger counter still around, it would have gone nuts. I didn't want to leave my suit open for too long, so I reached out with just my arm. A hand and fingers made of orange energy reached for the bomb, melting through the metal casing to grab the section that was actually capable of making the nuclear bomb nuclear. I pulled it out and dropped it into my mouth, chewing on the delicious nugget of energy with a sigh. The bomb stopped beeping as it slowly melted to nothing from the sheer heat of my arm having been inside of it. I snapped back my helmet and spun to face the enemies around us. Phantasma, stay up there. The floor, I raised 2 hands, then slammed my palms into the ground. The energy inside me, joined by that of the bomb, exploded from my gloves and went into the floor. For a moment, everything was still. Is lava. Then the whole room shook as the ground blew up in a wave of melted stone. The room temperature blew upwards as the servitors around us melted in a series of screams. Flesh and steel turned to ash and molten metal. Fuck me. Chernobog roared as a geyser of lava rose next to him. Damn it, warn me next time. The boiling lava filled the entire room for a moment, cooling quickly as I stood in the molten stone. More servitors tried to rush in, only to get lit on fire as well, weakly firing at us with plasma shots. Phantasma, still floating high above the molten stone, winced, whispering something caustic. Dial. Hey, I said up to her, blasting more heat from the grill of my suit. I had surprisingly high accuracy with those blasts, sending more servitors to the lava floor. Sorry, it was all pretty last minute. You aren't hurt, are you? No, she scowled at me. Why are you doing that voice? What dash? I stopped when I realized what she was talking about. Oh, well fuck, I guess the Omnitrix really did have a sense of humor. I swear, I said in a Russian accent. This isn't on purpose, this form just tends to sound like this. I hope you don't find a way to stop then, Chernobog said with a grin as he scooped up a handful of molten stone in his right hand to toss it at a gorilla. Because Vanguard is going to be pissed when he finds out. And of course, that thought seemed to fill him with glee. Author's note, so this is a bit awkward. I've been writing this story for a little while and it's been a fun ride. But I'm in a bit of a financial situation, with hospital bills and other things piling. So I reopened my Patreon page and updated it quite a bit. I'm hoping that with enough I'll be able to take some time off work to focus more on this and other fanfics/stories while also taking care of the everything of life. Anyways, the link to the page is at Patreon under the name Desert Chocolate, and H chapter 115, Self-Destruction. Nikolai Krylenko/Vanguard. Vanguard roared in rage as a punch from an orangutan hit him in the center of his shield, the strength of the 6-foot-tall ape lifting and throwing him dozens of feet through the air. Vanguard ground his feet until he came to a stop, then lashed out with a punch to a chimp's chin. Creel dropped down behind him to smack aside another ape. The former boxer/criminal was panting in his vibranium form. He looked exhausted. Vanguard felt the same way. They'd been fighting against the enemy non-stop now. Many Russian soldiers now lay dead on the ground, and Creel and Vanguard were next to the remains of a tank that had been destroyed. Men and primates were dying in droves. But the real issue was that Krakow wasn't running out of primates. He must have been developing the creatures for a long time to have so many to use as cannon fodder. High above, several aircraft were battling it out with the apes and monkeys, gunfire, and plasma shots flying hundreds of feet above the battlefield. Vanguard didn't have command over that particular part of the battle, but every once in a while a sudden explosion would mark a missile or bomb being dropped on the servitors. Mikhail rushed by with a mandrill in his mouth, shaking his head like a dog with a toy in his mouth. The bear man had been through the ringer. His fur had been singed across his pectorals and back, brown fur burned black, skin scorched. Long claw marks had been scratched on his face over one thankfully intact eye, as well as his chest, with one especially painful-looking one right on top of a burn. And yet, Mikhail was still rampaging. He spat out the mandrill he'd been chewing on, rose up to his feet and grabbed a cannon turret that had been left on the ground. With a single pull, he lifted the large piece of steel into the air and turned to face a gorilla. Come here. With great enthusiasm, Mikhail spun his newly stolen weapon to swipe, sending several apes flying through the air. More plasma shots hit him, but he only roared and dived back in to fight harder than before. How is he not tired? Creel panted. The Major has endless stamina for defending the Russian people, Vanguard said. It is inspiring. And also extremely annoying. An orangutan dropped out of the sky to land in front of them. Vanguard didn't have time to react before the 6-foot-tall ape grabbed him by the neck and lifted him off the ground. Vanguard snarled, trying to breathe through the pain. The orangutan slashed at his chest with the long steel claws on its other arm. Vanguard watched in near slow motion as 4 blades sliced through his costume and skin, sending up a spray of blood. Up until they were stopped by an extremely tough material. Unknown to most, Vanguard's enhancements included a subdermal body armor made of a combination of several lightweight materials, one of them being carbon. The 4 slash marks across his chest revealed that layer. The orangutan, being more near machine-like, showed no reaction to this except to claw at him again. Vanguard snarled as his armor, despite preventing the blades from slashing any deeper, were unable to stop the bruising from the hit itself. Creel grabbed the orangutan before it could strike again, snapping its arms with brutal force. Vanguard dropped to the ground and spun around, thrusting the sharp tip of his shield deep into the beast's chest. The worst part of fighting the apes was how emotionless they were. They roared at times, made small noises, but that seemed more a result of instinct. As the orangutan died, it simply stared at him emotionlessly. Another gorilla fired at Creel. Creel took the immense blast of plasma to his arm, the sheer heat of it burning off the remains of his clothes. Creel rushed the gorilla, grabbed its head and tore it off. Then he fell to his knees, coughing heavily. Creel. Vanguard grabbed him by the shoulders and pulled him into cover, a soldier rushing past him to fire at their opponents. Vanguard held back a scream of pain when his hands met Creel's form. Creel was hot. Almost insanely so. Only with the determination given to him by years of training was Vanguard able to ignore that to get Creel to cover behind a tree that had been destroyed. Vanguard eyed Creel, the superhuman still in vibranium form, his shirt and pants scorched to almost nothing. What is happening? Creel coughed, leaning his head back against the log they were using for cover. I haven't really gotten this hot so fast before. Or for this long. I just need a sec. Then Creel spun to his feet to stand behind Vanguard. Before Vanguard could say anything, the man was hit by more plasma shots. The temperature around Creel rose dramatically. Creel grabbed the log they'd been using as cover, lifting and tossing it at the shooters before falling to a knee. Shit, Creel whispered, staring down at himself. His metal carapace was unharmed, but anyone could see he was exhausted and in pain, panting heavily. His chest had noticeably taken on a slight red glow. Slowly, Creel rose up to his feet, still grimacing. Vanguard stared in silence as Creel, despite his pain, went into battle again. The metal man defended a male and female soldier from an ape, fought alongside Mikhail, battled against his pain to keep moving. Nikolai punched another opponent, ignoring the pain in his own chest from the claw marks that had torn through his skin. Vanguard. Phantasma's voice came on over the radio as he continued to fight. The nuke has been defused. He took a moment to feel relief at the good news. But we're dealing with a lot of enemies. If this doesn't stop soon dash. Whatever she was about to say was cut off by another explosion as a plane from the sky crashed on the battlefield. Vanguard grit his teeth. Phantasma was right. If something didn't end this soon, quantity would end up overrunning quality. No matter the strength of the Winter Guard, the Russian military, or, he thought as he eyed Creel, the strength of the Avenger. Mahmoud shift/dial. There's more coming in from the left. Phantasma shouted. She was flying by while blasting out magic and slashing out with her violet sword. But I could tell she was flagging. Her face was red with exertion, and her magic was coming just a bit slowed. Each of her shields were faster to crack, forcing her to replace them faster. She was also casting illusions. I only knew that because, every once in a while, a group of monkeys were suddenly replaced by Russian soldiers and copies of my aliens. Then they would get jumped by their friends and get torn apart in seconds. It was unnerving, seeing Big Chill and Four Arms getting torn apart by mad robot apes. Somebody cover the left, I need to focus. Phantasma shouted desperately. I got it, Chernobyl roared, ripping apart a mandrill to dive for a shaved chimp. He looked stranger than usual. His black form was slowly emitting black smoke like a leaky chimney, and his smile was less evil and angrier than I was used to. Apparently, he was feeling the pressure. I punched a gorilla in the gut, my huge fist crushing steel, then fired a nuclear blast to its face, melting its face off until I could see the skull. Fighting as NRG was weird. For one thing, I was struggling to move in the heavy armor I was wearing. My actual energy form was damn strong, but I still got slowed down by the heavy containment suit. Then, there was how I sent my blasts out while in the suit. I simply blasted my energy out from my actual body, and with no other way out thanks to my very tough suit, it would fire out through the face slits. It was weird, like I was doing push-ups and pull-ups at the same time. Two very different muscles working in opposite directions. I raised a fist and slammed it on the head of another ape, crushing flesh and steel, then blasted another one. I was feeling great, to be honest. NRG may have been weird to move around as, but I was also powerful. It felt awesome, walking around in a badass suit of armor while firing blasts of pure energy. I punched another chimp, shattering its jaw, then scooped of a handful of lava off the cooling floor and tossing it at another, ignoring the punch that hit me from a gorilla. The big ape and I wrestled for a moment. His big belly and large arms were wrestling against my own bulky form. I eventually mimicked a sumo move Nat had taught me, pulling his hips in toward me while my upper half push. Taken off guard, he tumbled to the ground, where I blasted him in the chest, melting flesh and metal, finishing it with a foot stomp. We were winning, but it wouldn't last. There seemed to be no end to the servitors pouring in. Chernobyl and Phantasma were both coming on the tail end of exhaustion, and while I was fresh thanks to the Omnitrix transforming me, I'd still time out sooner or later. Then, the lava heat around us would do the job. That or my newest frenemies would be dead. Something had to give, soon. Phil Cowlson. Guys, how is he doing this? Is he like Ghost? Cowlson yelled as he ducked yet more bullets from Kragoff. The Russian scientist had pulled out a AK-47 now, and was still going intangible in between shots. Hard to pin down too as he just ran through cover. Doubtful. Simmons yelled. He doesn't have the same sort of instability, she yelped when another gunshot took out a vase nearby. I don't know, he seems pretty unstable right now, Sky quipped, firing her plasma shots. They passed harmlessly through Kragoff, leaving him untouched. None of you can stop this. Kragoff shouted insanely. The world will at last understand. He fired his gun at Sky, then at Fitz, before aiming the assault rifle at May. For Russia. Would you stop shouting that? Cowlson returned. No one is this stupid patriotic, he stopped thoughtfully. I mean, most people aren't. May had stopped shooting in the meantime. She clearly saw how useless the effort was and had instead focused on keeping Fitzsimmons alive. Cowlson, we need to disable the servitors. Staying like this isn't going to help the others. Then Kragoff ran through her cover to stand in between them, forcing Cowlson and May to dodge a hail of bullets. Just die, damn you. Not happening, Kragoff. Cowlson returned. Underneath the bravado, his mind was racing. This was a waste of time. And that was the whole point for Kragoff, wasn't it? This power of his was insanely useful, as Ghost had proven a dozen times. Ghost had already been on Cowlson's list of dangerous enemies he wouldn't want to fight. Kragoff was only marginally less dangerous due to his old age slowing him down. And even then, he was pretty spry for an old man. But that was beside the point. The end point of all that was he was mostly just keeping them from doing the work that was important. Namely, uploading the virus that would shut down the servitors. Every time they got close to the computers, he would fire bullets like a madman while coming close to punch and kick his old man best to keep them away. He was trying to kill them, sure, but he was also keeping them very specifically from the computers. Did he know about the virus? Or did he have something else in mind? Whatever the case, Carlson had a plan as he rolled alongside Craven, who looked as frustrated as he felt. Hey Craven, Carlson said idly. Agent Carlson, Craven returned in a low growl. Tell me you have a way to kill him. I don't, Carlson admitted freely. But we've gotten, he tried to think of how to say it. We've been distracted from our real prey, the servitors as a whole. Craven's eyes widened in understanding. Agreed. We don't need to kill Kragoff. Just stop him from stopping us. Can you distract him long enough for her to get here? Carlson asked. I think I can oblige, Craven smirked. He leapt over cover and ran for Kragoff. The old scientist raised his gun towards Craven, firing away. Craven dodged. Never mind that it was technically impossible to dodge bullets. Craven still dived out of the way, reminding Carlson of footage of Natasha Romanoff pulling off similar maneuvers. Less dodging, more anticipating. The hunter dived in and sliced at Kragoff, who of course went intangible. Craven kept slicing, forcing Kragoff to stay intangible while Carlson sent a message. Everyone watched as Craven began to put on a master class in knife work. He sliced, dived, stabbed, and kicked. With insanely fast movements, he slashed down at the AK. His knife went through it, proving that Kragoff could at least make his weapons intangible as well. Kragoff, in response, began firing his gun wildly whenever he had a chance to, clearly trying to tag Craven with anything he possibly could. Craven kept being anywhere except in front of the gun, while also carefully guiding him to shoot away from the computers. Carlson watched carefully as he listened over the radio before finally shouting, Craven, now. Craven moved with incredible speed, clear away from Kragoff, taking a bullet to the leg for his trouble. Kragoff didn't have time to enjoy that. The ceiling cracked open above him, then shattered apart into chunks of rubble, raining down on the intangible form of Kragoff. The ancient communist scientist barked out in anger. Suddenly hundreds of pounds of metal enveloped in electricity dropped down from the ceiling. The crimson dynamo landed in a crouch before rising to her full height. Nice timing, Galina. Carlson said with a grin. Thank you, she said in a cheery voice. Kragoff ran out of the rubble and started shooting at her. Bullets bounced off of her armor. She chuckled. Really? Idiot. Fitzsimmons and Skye used her entrance to get to the computers. When Kragoff snarled and tried to hit them, Galina stepped in his way, blasting at the man with a single beam of electricity. Kragoff went intangible, but was unable to shoot around Galina's massive bulk to get to the others. For a moment, Carlson felt some relief that they had turned the tide. Then a loud wailing siren began to sound out. Kragoff smiled. Finally, he ran away from them, still shooting as he made his way to the other side of the room. May shot at him, Craven tossed his blade, and Galina fired twin beams of lightning. All of it just passed through the man. Too late. He ran up to one of the many tanks in the room, one of the few that hadn't been destroyed by random fire, and pulled a lever on it. As Skye and Fitzsimmons hurriedly hacked his computers, the tank Kragoff had pulled the lever on shattered before the floor beneath it snapped open, revealing a hole. He dropped in as Craven swiped at his neck. Craven seemed ready to follow him into the hole before his eyes widened, the hunter diving aside the minute he saw what was in the hole. First, the nose cone rose out with slowly from the trapdoor. Sections of the floor around the hole began to fall inward. The sound of rocket engines filled the room with an insanely loud din, mixing with the alarms and Kragoff's laughter. A fucking escape rocket, someone yelled as the large gray rocket came out in full. It was shaped like a simple rocket one would find in any toy store, with the exception of the giant Soviet Union symbol of the sickle and hammer on the side and the green flames sending it shooting up into the air instead of the normal red flames. It was also shrunken down, being apparently made for one person. Galina fired her lightning bolts at it, scorching the side and making the engines flutter. But the rocket continued to climb. Goodbye foul capitalists and national traitors. Kragoff crowed. Die in the fires of my retribution. He really is a Bond villain. Carlson shouted, looking over at Skye and Fitzsimmons. Can you stop him? We have bigger problems. Skye returned as she typed at her hollow screen, a frantic look on her face. He's activated a self-destruct. It's going to destroy the entire complex. We've got seconds, and the computer is already working on the virus. Simmons added. Here. Galina opened up her armor, hopping out of it with a section of keyboard attached to the thing. The young engineer rushed over to them. I can help with the self-destruct. Then I've got the virus, Skye agreed. All the while the rocket engine continued to roar as it ripped through the last section of roof. Kragoff laughing all the while. Carlson continued to watch. After a while, he walked over to a chair and sat down. Carlson. May in confusion. Craven walked up to join them. He looked between them. Hey, what else can I do at this point? Might as well enjoy the show. Craven gave Carlson a long look, then looked around. Galina, Skye, Fitz, and Simmons were working frantically at the computers. The rocket, flying on jets similar to the ones the monkeys had been using, was now exiting the ceiling. There was damage everywhere, a tiny worker monkey still blithely working on making more servitors. He sighed. Yes, I suppose that is all we can do. A self-destruct and an escape rocket though, right? I'm telling ya, he's a Bond villain. Carlson leaned back in his chair as he watched the rocket finally disappear into the sky. Shouldn't it be too hot for us to survive this close to a launch? Not with the thrusters he chose to use, Fisk said idly nearby. Then he cursed, pressing frantically at a keyboard. Damn it, dash. Here. Sky shouted back. Okay and, got it. Galena crowed. Fisk collapsed backward in relief. Meanwhile Sky watched while biting her bottom lip as a bar on her screen uploaded. For a long while, the bar seemed to freeze. Then she sighed in relief, turning to look at the others. The alert sound that had been ringing out stopped. The monkey workers, still working so diligently, fall to the floor like puppets getting their strings cut. We're saved, Carlson said in awe. Nikolai Krylenko/Vanguard. Vanguard looked around the battle. A servitor fell out of the sky to slam into the ground with an explosion of green. A gorilla, once so formidable, fell to its knees, then to its face, losing the green glow about it. The red-clad hero walked along the field. In the forests beyond, soldiers who had been fighting slowly walked out. Mikhail came up to him, the large bear man panting heavily. Together, they watched hundreds of apes slowly shut down, dropping to land in the bloody dirt and remains of life that had covered the field. More fell from the skies. Solemnly, Vanguard looked around. Then he sighted one of the warriors lying on the ground nearby. Creel. Vanguard rushed over the taller man, turning him to face up. The bald superhuman was staring up with wide eyes as he stayed in vibranium form. Creel. Need a minute, Creel coughed. He looked down at his gauntlet. The device was mostly intact, but still had cracks all over the surface. I can't risk changing back until I cool down. Vanguard noted that as a possible weakness. On a much more important note. Here, Vanguard began piling some snow next to Creel. There wasn't much. A lot had been trampled or melted by the running feet and the plasma blasts. For once, Russia's cold will aid an outsider, rather than her people. Creel chuckled weakly. Poetic. I am ever the soul of poetry, Vanguard said without a hint of humor. Mikhail watched the team leader of Winter Guard tend to an American criminal turned Avenger, noting the soldiers gathering around and cheering for the victory won. Mahmoud Shaft/Dial. I watched the servitors fall to the ground around us, some of the molten stone splashing with the bodies that fell into it. For a long moment, it was quiet. Then I heard Phantasma panting, obviously exhausted. When I looked up, she was still floating over the battlefield, staring down in disbelief. Weary done, she said softly. Still in NRG form, I nodded. She looked like she was about to pass out, but was holding back. Realizing the problem, I mentally shifted my form. Big chill. Back in giant Mothman form, I released a cool mist. The molten stones around me quickly solidified, sometimes bubbling at random. After a few moments of this, the temp dropped enough that it was safe. Phantasma slowly floated down until she almost fell. I flew up to help her down, wrapping her arm around my shoulders to support her. As we came down to the floor covered in frosted over servitor corpses and formerly molten stone, Chernobog flowed over to us as we landed. So, we're done? He asked casually. I tapped the Omnitrix, returning to human form with a sigh. Yeah, I think we're done. I shrugged to get Phantasma closer so I could take more of her weight. My armor was much thinner than before, the prolonged combat having destroyed large chunks of Cadams. Phantasma had a magically healing wound on her leg that was surrounded in purple sparks, and Chernobog looked like he was fading away. We'd been hit hard. I'm pretty sure if the Omnitrix hadn't been around, we'd have lost. Thank you, Azimuth. Good, Chernobog grunted. We turned and walked toward the exit. I need a drink, Phantasma mumbled. And a spa treatment. Never had one of those, I said as we exited to the hallway, passing the 3 super apes we'd killed early. I can tell. You have terrible skin, she said idly. Chernobog chuckled. Then he sighed. Well, this has been fun. But I'm done. Phantasma stiffened against me. Chernobog. Nope, he said with a note of satisfaction. I don't give a fuck what those morons said about secrets of the nation, I'm done. I'm overdue for a nap, and the other guy can walk the rest of the way home. Wait, I said, starting to get an inkling of what they were talking about. After all, not only was I a nerd, I was also a friend of Bruce Banner's. Chernobog, the tall being that had been the bane of my existence for the past day, exuded smoke at a fast rate. The chilly black wisps blew past as he shrank down. I watched with eyebrows raised as the big inky black figure of Nightmares disappeared, getting sucked into a pale form underneath. The man who stood there instead was almost disappointingly small in comparison. I mean, he wasn't tiny or anything, but he gave the same feeling as Bruce in some ways. All that power, itty-bitty living space. He wore a simple black button-up shirt and some slacks, a pair of glasses, his head was balding at the top, and he had a short and well-groomed beard. He looked like someone's dad. The man adjusted his glasses. Hello. My name is Alexei Smirnov. Nice to meet you, I said questioningly. We stood there awkwardly for a moment. Alexei coughed. I'd better let everyone else know we're okay, I said, reaching for my Omnitrix and tapping it to open the COMM. Phil Carlson. I'm glad you guys are safe, Dial, Carlson said through his own comm unit. He looked up at the others in the room and raised a thumb up. Sky was already sighing in relief, Fitzsimmons smiling while Craven nodded firmly. Galena and May didn't show much reaction that most would notice, but Carlson could tell May was satisfied, and guessed Galena was relieved. We heard from Vanguard's group a while ago, Carlson continued. They're all right, but Creel was injured. Something about overheating? It's not something we've encountered with his abilities before, so he's being sent to the basecamp infirmary to make sure he's all right. A series of loud yells came from the COMM. Carlson swayed in place calmly as Dial continued to ask frantic questions before interrupting. We'll be getting out soon, Dial, and Simmons will take a look at him immediately. She's pretty eager to figure out what is going on. Because I'm worried about Creel, Simmons protested. Carlson gave her a look. She quivered silently. And yes, because I'm thinking about the science as well, she admitted. But it's mostly to help Creel. Carlson chuckled. Well, we will dash. Wait, Galena interrupted. She was at the computer again. She frowned at it. A timer just started on the computer. Everyone snapped around to stare at the screen. 10, 9. Are you bloody kidding me? Fitz shouted in frustration. We have to go, Carlson told Dial calmly. Outside, the train yard was quiet. Dozens of servitors lay across tracks and rusted hulks, and portions of the walls and other sections were still smoking from the recent battle. The quiet was ruined when two beings carrying others flew out of a shattered rooftop. For exactly 6 seconds, everything was peaceful except for the sounds of the group rocketing upward as fast as they could go. Then a loud cracking sound filled the air. The explosion that followed started at the edges of the train yard in a massive circle. Then they cascaded inward, over and over, the ground buckling, fire rising along with dirt and corpses. For a moment, the world was fire. Trees all around were blown back by the sheer force of it. Carlson, hanging tightly to Sky's hand, grit his teeth as he was buffeted by the winds from the blast, May holding Sky's other hand getting just as battered. Sky screamed as she climbed higher and higher to avoid the shockwave. When it hit, she'd managed to get far enough away. Once the world had stopped shaking, the group looked down at the destroyed remains of the former lab/nightmare factory. Fitzsimmons had been carried in Crimson Dynamo's arms, while Craven had simply clutched to her back, the two scientists staring down in horror at the crater that had replaced the train yard. Carlson looked up at Sky. Were you able to get anything from the computers? Sky gave him a stunned look, gulped, then nodded. Why yeah, I'm not sure how much, but I still managed to download a lot. Good, Carlson looked back down that crater. Good. Because we aren't done with Kragoff. None of us are. With that ominous note, the sun began to rise in the distance, illuminating the smoke trail left by Kragoff's ascent. Mahmoud Sheikh/Dial. I helped Phantasma up the stairs with my new best friend Alexei the Dark God, the three of us slowly making our way up. When we got to the top, some rubble was blocking the way. New rubble, I mean, not the rubble from earlier. Great, Phantasma said sarcastically. I got it, I said with a grin. Flipping through the menu on the Omnitrix, I went through the options. I just got NRG, so I kinda want an excuse anyway. Alexei adjusted his glasses. Is he really the most appropriate for this? He'll work. I pressed down on the Omnitrix. Light surrounded me, followed by the massive gray suit of the nuclear alien. NRG. With great enthusiasm, I punched upward, then pushed. Stones as large as cars were pushed aside with ease. I laughed. Yes, I am most impressive, my friends. Now I know how you feel around Chernobog, Alexei the secret keeper of evil said to Phantasma. No, he's not nearly as bad, Phantasma said, though not unkindly. Alexei chuckled. All of a sudden, the massive weight I'd been lifting got a lot easier to pick up. With another shove, we were free. Mikhail and Vanguard were there to meet us. They helped me shift aside some of the stones to give room for the exhausted Alexei and Phantasma. It is good to see you, comrades, I said cheerily. Vanguard and Mikhail stopped lifting stones. They turned to look at me. What? Is something wrong? You had better not be talking that way on purpose, Vanguard snarled. Oh, yeah, the rest of the day was a lot more fun after that, thankfully. And less scary. Author's note, next chapter, the Russia arc will end, and we take some time to decompress with the fam back in America. Notably, Dial has an Emerald Warrior to talk to, and it's not the Green Lantern. I'm also planning on making sure the Russia arc doesn't just have no consequences. Bill Foster and Ava Starr will be among those interested in the arc, for example. Chapter 116, Return. May 13, 2014. We piled into an APC together. Vanguard, Creel, Phantasma, Mikhail, Alexei the secret dark god, and me. Phantasma fell asleep as soon as she got into the truck, her head resting on Mikhail's shoulder. I had to admit, I was feeling the mental strain myself. Mikhail looked like he'd been through the ringer. He was covered in tiny cuts and burns across his bare chest and arms, like he'd fallen through a rosebush that was on fire. Creel was resting on a stretcher in between us, snoring slightly. I gave him a grin. He was all right now apparently, but the fact he'd even gotten to a state of being damaged had scared the shit out of me. As the car rattled along, I looked up at Vanguard, who still looked miffed. Hey, I told you, man. NRG just sounds like that. I can't help it. You turned into a literal walking atomic reactor and immediately gained a ridiculous Russian accent, he asked me with more than a hint of annoyance. Look, NRG is basically the closest equivalent to a space Russian. I rubbed the back of my neck. I mean, that is just how the Omnitrix translates him to Earth languages. That's all. I mean, if I was going to do a mocking accent, why would I do it in the middle of a battle? He sighed. Boy, I understand that logically. But you should know that this isn't a logical emotion. It will take me time to get over how annoying this is. Fair enough, I nodded toward his chest. Some bandages had been placed under his red suit, some seepage of blood going through the white gauze. You okay? He looked down at his wounds before nodding. Yes. Seems you've also taken quite the hit. He nodded toward my armor, which, while technically intact, still had some scars. I nodded. Yeah, we've all had our beating. But hey, we won. Not yet, Mikhail said, scowling. Not until we find Kragoff again. Vanguard nodded while Alexei adjusted his glasses nervously, which just drew my attention to the small man. So, you, I said with a raised eyebrow. You what, host Chernobog? Yes, Alexei coughed. But, that is confidential information. Mikhail grumbled something about that horn debil, the last word being a pretty common Russian insult. I'll sign the waiver later, I joked. But why is it confidential? If no one knows Alexei exists, we have an operative that can stand in a crowd, as unassuming as can be, only to suddenly become a god, Vanguard explained. And if no one knows Chernobog has a host, why would they look for one? And that was terrifying to think about. Chernobog, even against cloned apes running on computer brains, had been horrifying. Him suddenly transforming in a crowd, or God forbid being taken hostage. That would scare the shit out of anyone. Dude was a funny asshole. He was also sadistic as shit. Alexei winced. Well, I wouldn't put it like that. I'm really not suited for all this violence. I remembered the moment when Chernobog had licked a servitor gorilla's cheek before biting into it like an apple. Yeah, people might find that hard to believe. I leaned my head back in my seat and sighed. Things got quiet after that, all of us just resting. It had been one hell of a past few hours after all. The APC bounced and jostled on its way to the nearest military base, Creel snoring peacefully the whole way. When we got to the base, Boris was there waiting for us. We didn't have much time to say hi. The smiling politician pulled us through a crowd of watching soldiers and personnel into the main base. Phantasma was woken up and followed along while yawning a bit, and Creel was sent to the infirmary on the base. Cowlson, Sky, May, Fitzsimmons, Craven, and Galena were all waiting for us. A tight knot in my chest released the second I saw them. Sky and Fitzsimmons gave me relieved smiles, rushing toward me. We wrapped each other in a hug, the four of us coming together. Phantasma hugged Galena, who was smiling like an older sibling trying to seem cool, Craven sharing a small nod toward the others. I have to go check on Creel, Simmons said once we'd all released our hugs, giving me another one. I chuckled as I wrapped my arms around her. It's so good to have you back. I wasn't gone that long, but I appreciate it, I said with a grin. She gave me a happy look, then rushed toward the infirmary. I'm glad you're all right, I said with a look around. Man, I cannot wait to get home. It'll just be a day or so, Boris noted. He strolled over to join us. I must admit, you all went above and beyond what would have been expected. That's what we do in Bridge, Cowlson said. Save the world and look good doing it. I asked. That's right, Sky smirked. Boris chuckled good-naturedly. Well, we do have some issues to deal with, Cowlson scowled. Kragoff escaped. And he's enhanced. Has the power to go through objects and people. Like Ghost, but with less problems. Oh come on, seriously. I grumbled. He already had a monkey army. Intangibility is just cheating. You're one to talk, Fitz pointed at the Omnitrix. Don't you have over a dozen aliens with powers in that thing? Yeah, but only one at a time, I grumbled again. Regardless, he's escaped, Boris said angrily. And we will track him, and whoever has been helping him, down. He threatened the people of Russia with his foolishness. He is now our priority. Yay, more bad guys, I grumbled for the third time. I was hungry, sue me for being grumpy. And seriously, we had a whole bevy of enemies at this point. I was starting to feel real eager to start chipping that list down. By the way, can I ask about him? Cowlson pointed at Alexei. Boris scowled. Well dash. He's Cherney's host, I said immediately. Cherney. Half the room said incredulously. Yeah, Chernobog, I said idly. By the way, how did that happen? Alexei opened his mouth, then closed it. Then he sighed. Yeah, that one is a long story. And your powers? Cowlson asked Mikhail. Mikhail blinked. That is also a long story. And what the hell happened to your briefcase? Craven asked Boris. We all looked down at the massive dent that was now in the side of Boris' metal briefcase. Boris laughed good-naturedly. Well, as my friends have noted, that is a long story. Well hell, I have an idea for that, I said, thinking of Tony. Specifically, of a story he told me. After Creel is checked out, you guys want to go somewhere together? Someplace with good food. I know a place. Mikhail offered. A couple of hours later, we all piled into an APC and headed out, Boris convincing the commanders on base to look the other way. I can't say why we all left. But my personal reason was simple. Because screw it. I'd had a long battle, filled with an insane number of twists and turns, I was hungry, and I wanted to have some fun. So, once Creel was cleared, I left with the others. With a little drive out to certain bar called the Golden Grizzly, going through the snow until we reached the large wooden structure, we finally had a chance to relax again. Moments later, we were all sitting around a big wooden table covered in scratches and dents from years of rough treatment from drunk Russians, one of the top 5 types of drunks in the world. Zaz Derifier. We tapped drinks together with a riotous cheer, some of the soldiers who had already been at the bar joining us. They broke off respectfully, leaving just our core group to stay behind. Staring from my left were Creel, Sky, Carlson, May, Fitz, Simmons, Craven, Alexei, Galina, Vanguard, Boris, Mikhail, Phantasma, then me. Okay, Carlson said as soon as it was clear of people that weren't us. We've got a few hours. Let's talk about confidential stuff. Mikhail gave Phantasma a look. The Violet Witch raised a hand and clenched it. A mandala sprouted around the large table, surrounding us entirely, then shattered. The instant it did, all sound beyond that mandala's borders stopped reaching us. I leaned my head back until I could hear the bar again. Then forward. Damn. She'd made a soundproof bubble around us? Awesome. Oh, that is so cool, I said in awe. Phantasma flashed me a bright smile. I patted Creel on the back next to me, my friend looking a hell of a lot better than he used to be. Creel gave me a grin, chugging his drink while ignoring Simmons' glare. Apparently they'd had a brief argument about the merits of alcohol while recovering. He'd decided to drink a light beer instead, which in Russia meant very little. Okay, so we will talk now, Mikhail nodded. Where do we begin? To that, we all looked over at Alexei. The man sighed. Yes, well, I suppose I am the most obvious one to start with. Hell yes, Creel, Sky, and I said in unison. He adjusted his glasses again, then leaned over the table. Very well. Months ago, Rio had its, what has Bridge called it? Timequake, Carlson said. Really? Alexei cocked his head, then shrugged. Very well. As Chernobyl tells it, the timequake had released him. He'd been left in some other dimension, locked away. But then the timequake happened. And when he awoke, he went somewhere familiar to him. I narrowed my eyes. The timequake. Looks like it had more repercussions than I had expected. But then, how could it not? So, I was a bartender in my village. I remembered Chernobyl mixing himself a drink with some skill. I worked for an old friend of mine, helping him with the accounts and everything else. One night I was walking home and, well, there were some old ruins, near the village. The kind of place the kids would go to hang out in, smoke, drink, scare each other with old stories. That night when the smoke entered my lungs, I didn't think anything of it. Then the voice started talking to me. Animals in the woods, small ones at first, then bigger ones like deer. Some people started showing up at our doctor saying they were very tired. And I started to feel better. Better? May asked. I was dying. Lung cancer, Alexei smiled bitterly. The children in the village weren't the only ones smoking. But as time went on, I started to feel invigorated. Stronger than I was as a young man even. Then, Chernobyl spoke to me. And you didn't decide the dark voice in your head absorbing people's life force might need to be kicked out? I asked curiously. He wasn't hurting anyone, Alexei protested. No one was dying, or even getting harmed. He offered me a deal. If I let him stay, he would cure me. Instead of the extra year that I had been given, I could live forever. I just had to give up half of my time. Let him run the show. May narrowed her eyes. Run the show. It's not that bad. I just let him use my body for a long time, leaving me to feel like I've been asleep for longer than usual, and then he gives it back whenever I like. Alexei looked around. He's been good. When the government offered him things in return for him channeling his powers to help, he agreed. In return for what? Carlson asked. Vanguard narrowed his eyes. Mikhail coughed uncomfortably. Craven looked unmoved, while Galina and Phantasma shared a look of annoyance. There are people in the prison system, Alexei said uncomfortably. Pedophiles, sex offenders, serial killers, etc. People who wouldn't be missed. And then, the one thing he demanded most heavily, an internet connection, and free access to every streaming site he wants. If we'd lived in an anime, I would have face-faulted. Food and internet, Vanguard said sarcastically. The various Winter Guard members chuckled, clearly in on a joke the rest of us weren't. I don't approve of Chernobyl, though recent events make me less inclined to let my dislike of my co-workers affect my job. His eyes flickered to my left. And beyond that, he is incredibly useful as a warrior. Carlson shook his head, the older man taking a swig of his drink. Hard to argue that. But using a dark life force-eating god to punish prisoners, that's a slippery slope. The UN is going to have some thoughts on that, especially in terms of ethicality. He only eats half. And it's entirely painless, Alexei said. I'm pretty sure I wasn't the only one to remember the image of screaming monkey souls, or the feel of Chernobyl's laugh tugging on our souls. When he chooses for it to be painless, it is, Alexei explained further. So when he does that fucking laugh, that uncomfortable feeling of him tugging on our soul, is him fucking with us? I asked. Alexei chugged his drink. What an asshole, Creel, and I said in unison. I can't really argue against that, Alexei coughed. After a moment of awkward silence Mikhail talked. As for me, my story is far more simple. Well, at least, the beginning of it is. As a young man I was involved in some clandestine operations. I found out around my teens during that time that I was able to change, to become powerful. And I was used to fight the battles of those who my handlers deemed threats to us. Until I ended up destroying them, he smiled. And I suddenly realized who he was. Or at least, where he had come from. What the clandestine operations he'd been doing had been. Mikhail looked me in the eyes. I didn't respond. But I noted it as he continued to speak. As far as our scientists can tell from studying my genetics, I was born with an aberrant gene, one that has allowed me to change my form naturally, something that we haven't found in others. I may be unique, or one of many, I'm not sure. I thought about that. Aberrant gene. That sounded like. Then Boris was talking, distracting me from whatever I had been thinking. I believe it is my turn, yes. He lifted up his metal briefcase, showing off the big dent in the side. During the battle on the field, I gave Vanguard control of our forces on the ground. A move that I felt was best, as he is not only a skilled strategist and commander, but is also the one who had the most experience with the enemy at the time. Some of those politicians who have some pull over the Winter Guard protested, so I had to persuade them. It was only then that I realized that Boris kind of reminded me of Sammy. Overweight, but with big dim arms and knuckles covered in a few scars. His nose was also slightly bent from a former break. Apparently he was more of a former badass than I would have expected. Can't you get in trouble? May asked, the super spy sipping at some very expensive alcohol. If I do, it'll just mean I have to buy another briefcase, he chuckled. I have long since gained some clout, Miss May. I have worked hard for my government, so I am allowed some leeway in how much damage I can do to people, especially when they're being idiots. Fair enough, Carlson sighed, relaxing back in his seat. Well, I suppose that's everything. Unless everyone else has a deep dark secret they want to reveal. Not in this chapter, I joked. But hey, we're here. Let's have some fun. Fun, Mikhail scoffed. You came to a Russian bar, and ordered that? How can you have fun if you won't drink? I blinked down at my mug of compote, a fruity non-alcoholic Slavic drink the bartender had recommended, then smirked. Hey, you haven't seen the kinds of parties I've been at. I throw a hell of a food fight. Dr. Leopold Fitz. Fitz was not exactly the partying type. Or at the least, he wasn't the type to party the way this current crowd did. Sky, Mahmoud, Creel, Fantasma, and Mikhail were dancing together. Very badly, but the group was laughing as Fantasma and Mikhail tried their best to teach the Americans how to dance. Simmons and Craven, surprisingly, were in a corner talking. Well, Simmons was. For some reason, Craven seemed very fond of her. Simmons was showing him what looked like a series of graphs, and the muscular hunter was positively fascinated by what she was saying. Huh, what an odd couple. Fitz, on the other hand, was sitting across from Galina and sharing some ideas. Okay, here, Fitz did a final edit to the schematic he'd been working on, then passed it over to her. I can't share my actual notes, since those are classified, but this might be a good way for you to get your armor to be more compact. I'm not so sure, Galina scowled down at the schematic. The problem is the material I use. Carborundum is good for running electricity through. Its part of the armor is so effective, but it's not very flexible. It doesn't have to be. Fitz placed his drink down. You've heard of graphene? Some of the work they've been doing on it. Galina nodded slowly. Well, it is one of the most conductive materials in existence. But it also has bloody amazing tactile strength. You can layer sheets of it wherever carborundum might not allow for flexibility, use that to make lighter armor without sacrificing durability or conductivity. All you need to do is create a monolayer of carbon atoms to make the sheets, and you can do that by. Fitz stopped to think. Was it a good idea to try and help a technical enemy with this stuff? Well, she was going to hunt down Kragoff. Plus, if he helped her, that meant he could also make his own weapons against her. Just in case. He leaned over. Okay, so this is what my own research has shown. Dr. Gemma Simmons. Simmons watched as Craven flipped through a series of videos on his tablet. Okay, look here, the gruff man showed the tablet to her again. I filmed this as a part of my show years back. I was hunting black mamba near a village, trying to get it before it killed anyone. You didn't hurt it, did you? Simmons asked worried. Craven smiled. No, while I do hunt, I avoid killing endangered species. I kill for food and honor, not to sate some sort of bloodlust. But that is not the point, he pointed at the video. There were several things I found disturbing about the hunt. Things that I found odd. The patterns of the herds, the predators. I believed at the time that it may have had to do with certain practices of the village. And you want to know what caused it? Simmons asked. I want to see if you can discover the reason. Craven gave her a slightly odd smirk. You've shown some promise. I want to see how much skill you have in understand the heart of animals. You're testing me, Simmons said, trying not to sound too eager. How exciting? It had been years since she'd had a good test. Craven nodded. I rarely take students. But you interest me. Even if you don't wish to hunt, I can see some value in you learning some of my skills. Simmons thought about that. In truth, she did have a background on the sort of things Craven focused on. Despite what most thought, hunters and bioscientists often depended on one another to do their work more efficiently. In fact, whenever forests or jungles encountered some sort of issue, hunters were often the first to let scientists know. It wasn't a perfect relationship, but there was one worth pursuing. And Craven was a very good hunter. Well, give me a moment. Simmons watched the video, biting her lip thoughtfully. So the animals in the village were reacting some outside stimuli? 9 times out of 10, that tended to be man-made, but there were some natural things that could have similar effects. The best indicator was what animals were being affected. Black mamba. Craven watched quietly as Simmons excitedly began to work. Phil Carlson / leader of Team Shield. So your plane was destroyed, Boris said. Carlson nodded sadly. He had liked the business, loved it. That plane had been beautiful. Old, sure, but with all its upgrades it had been one hell of a plane. And now she was gone. May gave Carlson a sympathetic look, well, sympathetic for her, anyways, before turning to Boris. And now we will need a ride back to the States. If need be, Bridge will fly over a Quinjet, but we thought we might ask you. Not a problem, Boris chuckled. After you helped stop a nuclear weapon and an army from killing our citizens, it would be rather crass of me not to aid you, would it not? Thank you, Carlson said, trying not to sound too bitter about losing his sweet ride. And Lola. We've left orders to leave her in a safe location, Boris explained. While usually she would be studied, we already have some models similar to her in storage, so she will be untouched and ready for you to take her to the States. I appreciate that. Carlson then looked over at the group dancing to the loud music. And what about? They already know, Boris sighed. We'd long since planned this, but Kragoff ended up accelerating those plans. As I'm sure you can imagine. But we've been prepared. Nikolai's sister is ready as well. And this is most beneficial for us all. Do the Avengers know? Everyone who wasn't here. So, Dial and Creel don't know, Carlson explained. Why not? Boris asked. Because we were busy with other things, May said. Dial and Creel are big boys, they'll understand why we kept it a secret. And I don't think they'll mind too much, Carlson noted. He was watching those dancing. May and Boris turned to look as well. Phantasma was helping Creel dance, laughing as he grumpily tried to follow her. Mikhail was having better luck with Dial, Sky laughing at the two as Dial blushed. They seemed to be having fun. Soon they switched, Phantasma and Mikhail dancing together. There was a brief moment of warmth there. When Phantasma danced with Mikhail there was a closeness between. Nothing romantic. More like a proud father having a good time with his youngest daughter. Sky looked over at Carlson and noticed him watching. She gave him a smile, and Carlson felt his lips turn up in return. Mahmoud /Dial. Okay, here you go, Alexei passed me a drink, surprising me. I'd taken a break by sitting on my own, watching everyone have a good time. Of all people to join me at the table, Alexei had been just above. May I? Vanguard, the bottom of the list for people I'd expected, joined Alexei, the pair sitting down with me. Sure. I said hesitantly. Alexei and Vanguard sat across from me. Vanguard looked a lot better, and had long since dropped his mask to reveal his rugged features, getting really tired of being the only non-supermodel superhero. Alexei similarly looked happy. I looked down at the drink he'd handed me. Don't worry, it's more compote, an apple one this time, Alexei said with a smile. Oh, well, thanks, I hesitantly looked between them. So, we've had a hell of a mission. I finally have a story that beats Tony's at least. It certainly is not what I expected, Vanguard said gruffly. I had assumed our missions would be more realistic. Welcome to the world of superheroism, I said with a shrug. It just gets crazier from here. Just wait until more aliens drop out of the sky. He didn't seem to know how to take that. How about you? I asked Alexei. You've got Chernobyl inside you, he's probably seen crazier. Alexei frowned thoughtfully. A few. But he never sees them as crazy. In fact, pretty much every moment about the past few days has been par for the course for him. Makes sense he'd have a higher threshold, I guess. I sipped at my drink. Truthfully, while that whole mess had gotten a little nuts, the Servitors hadn't been quite on the level of Rio, which admittedly was tough to top. Enough men died during this mission, Vanguard said softly, looking over at the soldiers in the room around us. I don't want things to be any crazier. Fair enough. Crazy for superheroes usually meant death for everyone in our immediate vicinity if we didn't move fast enough. I had to deal with that kind of thing a few times, I said sadly. I mean, I try my best. But, the images of corpses in Rio, of body bags in the Triskelion, filled my mind. Can't save everyone. Goddamn, what a fucking sad thing to say. Can't save everyone. Like that solved anything. Yay for damned platitudes. I couldn't help my disgust at my own words. Vanguard apparently noticed. He raised his drink. To those who were lost. Alexei raised his own drink. And to those we saved. I looked between them. Then I raised my glass and struggled to think of what to add. And to the battles to come, the people we'll work to save. I'll drink to that. Vanguard clinked his glass with ours and we all took a swig. Ha 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 ha. Phantasma, smiling happily, dropped into the seat in front of me. She was clearly a little drunk. Heya, magic girl, I raised an eyebrow. You okay? Why does she hiccuped loudly? Yes, I'm all right. One moment, she waved her hand slowly, clearly using all the focus she could muster. Then she clapped. Some purple sparks appeared before her head and she sighed in relief. Did you just cure your drunkenness? I asked. Not quite, she said, sounding more focused. I simply staved it off. I'll still need to deal with the results of a hangover. How many spells do you know, anyways? I asked curiously. She frowned thoughtfully, resting her head in her hand. I am not sure. My magic is very instinctual. I have to think about it, sometimes, but I often just need to have the focus and willpower to do the spell. I have to practice, of course. I can't just make a new spell out of thin air, and I've spent hours perfecting them. But it's like I'm forcing myself to remember them, rather than making new ones. Sounds similar to my watch, I noted. I tapped the Omnitrix. I've gotten pretty good with the watch. And I've got sort of a cheat code on how to use them, if you could call dozens of episodes of a kick-ass cartoon a cheat code. But I still need to get used to them, figure things out and whatnot. Phantasma nodded slowly. Then she quirked her head to the side and looked closer at me. You never seem thrown when I talk about magic. When I looked confused she continued. Even now, I still have the researchers calling what I do quantum displacement something or other. Mikhail thinks I'm like him. Vanguard thinks I got my powers from radiation. Galina thought I was cheating with machines. She hesitated before continuing. Chernobog was the first person to take what I do at face value. Why do you believe me as well? None of your friends do. Well, shoot. How was I going to explain? Oh right, this basically had its own explanation. Last year, I wouldn't have believed how my life would go. Then I woke up in a world where a group of superhumans fought off aliens, my Omnitrix let me turn into those aliens, and now I fight monsters and villains for the fate of the Earth. I shrugged. Magic being real, that's not a surprise. That's another folder to be added to my file cabinet of super awesome but weird information. She smiled. I'm super awesome. Super awesome, I said with a grin. Phantasma laughed, her eyes glittering before she gave me a soft smile. Thank you, Mahmoud. You're welcome. I got up from my seat and held a hand out. So, I've got a flight in the morning. Till then. Want to dance? As you know, I could use some practice. She nodded and placed a hand in mine, rising gracefully, a little smirk on her face as her eyes continued to glitter happily. I would love that. May 13, 2014. We hung out for a while before the Winter Guard had to be pulled to their duties. We were flown back to Moscow in a helicopter, where our newest frenemies got pulled into a series of PR bonanzas. I got to watch it from the Winter Guard base with the others, watching as Vanguard led the rest of his team for a series of photo ops and short interviews. They downplayed the role of the Americans in the whole thing of course, so we didn't get any awards, but I wasn't too offended by that. I took a nap at some point. Carlson woke me up from the bunks we'd borrowed on the base to start the trip back to the States a few hours later. Fitzsimmons went to say goodbye to Galina, who had apparently spent the night designing things instead of sleeping. I found myself saying goodbye to someone who surprised the hell out of me. Now look, Chernobog placed a massive hand on my shoulder. I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I'm going to miss you. When you turned into NRG, he shuddered. My stomach was never in such turmoil. Why is every conversation with you an awkward horror movie? I asked, as uncomfortable as possible without literally crawling out of my own skin. Can you change into him? Just one more time. The black-skinned monster smiled down at me in what he probably thought was a comforting way. Just so I can taste that power. Okay, first, I pushed his hand off me. Please stop talking in that black speech you do. Second, I am going home now. Chernobog sighed sadly. Well, I suppose I'll have to visit you instead, he chuckled, my heart clenching painfully as he did. It's too bad. But you should be proud, Mahmoud Sheikh. You are now first on my list of people to visit in the United States, just above the Bald Mountains and Disneyland. I walked away as fast as possible as he laughed behind me. Yep. Not gonna miss that guy. And I was damn tempted to destroy the slip of paper he'd given me with his email address on it. I went as fast as I could, headed to a location I'd found last night. I had sort of a thing that I'd been doing lately. And if I had the chance to keep it going, might as well extend it in a different direction. I walked into the more public section of the base. While it wasn't exactly a tourist trap, it was made to accept those deemed safe by the government. And considering the skill they had with public relations, the Russian government had ironically embraced one of the best parts of capitalism. And so I found myself in the gift shop, grabbing as many Winter Guard shirts of different types as I could. As I was comparing a chibi Chernobog shirt and a heroic Vanguard one, Creel walked into the gift shop as well, quirking an eyebrow at me. Of course you're grabbing more nerd gear. I have a style now, man. I have to contribute to it, I said with a shrug. Granted, it's mostly Tony's fault, but it's still my style now. I looked up at him. How are you, man? You scared the shit out of me. Creel reached for the shirts I was looking at on the shelf, flipping through them. He was clearly not really seeing the clothes though. He was looking through the smalls, or the Russian equivalent anyway. The women's smalls at that? I'm all right, he said at last. Creel dash. I said I'm all right. He looked at me with a scowl. I got hit hard, I'll admit it. But I've been knocked down. And I've always gotten up again. Yeah, you have, man. I scowled back at him. I'm your friend, dude. I was worried about you. Sorry, damn. Creel gave me a glare. Then he looked back at the shirts and finally realized what he was doing when he picked up a shirt that was clearly designed to reflect Phantasma's outfit. He stared at it, eyes wide. He said in confusion. Then my phone flashed. When he turned my way I was chuckling as I sent the photo off. Yeah, you'd look good in that. Hope Izzy agrees. You little dash. I ducked under Creel's outstretched arm, still laughing. Creel grumbled as he tossed the shirt back on the shelf. He walked over to another bunch of shirts. Yeah, it sucked, I guessed. But I'll get over it. I'll figure out some way to get used to it, or maybe a way to cool down fast when I need to. I'll get stronger. He looked at me out of the corner of his eye. Thanks though, for worrying, man. I gave him a manly punch to the shoulder, then grabbed my manly chibi Winter Guard shirt and went to purchase a few extras. What is this? Carlson asked later. He was staring at the same thing we were. A plane. A big-ass plane that actually put the currently destroyed bus to shame in size. This thing was just stupid huge. Bright white with a blue stripe, it stood on the tarmac of the Russian airport like a dragon come to life, our group staring at it with wide eyes. This is one Antonov and 124 Ruslan, Boris said proudly. He waved at it. One of the largest and most powerful planes in the world? A marvel of engineering, a true testament to the craft. There are cameras again, I noted, looking around at the media. There was a huge audience as well. Which kinda made sense, considering what an important goodbye this was. They weren't taking much more than some token photos, but the fact they were there was annoying. There was also a big stand nearby with a podium that had dozens of microphones on it. I don't think we're going to like where this is headed. Sky nodded next to me. I can hack the cameras, maybe, unless their tech is too old. I can always shoot them. May sounded a lot more ready to do that than I would have expected. Guess even the most stoic person had her limits. Creel and Fitzsimmons seemed to share our thoughts on the matter. Yep, really not going to like this, I decided. You won't, a female voice said. We turned to see Fantasma and Mikhail walking up to us. Mikhail was back in his military gear. Fantasma, on the other hand, surprised me by coming up with a blue blouse and blue jeans, carrying a large bag over her shoulder. I'd gotten used to her purple outfit and tall boots. Hey, Fantasma, Mikhail, Carlson said politely. Hey, I said with a small smile. Kind of expected you in your superhero costume. I've been told I tend to distract in that uniform, she said with a smirk. Yeah you do, Sky said huskily. She blinked when we turned to look at her. What? She's hot, I can accept that. Fantasma opened and closed her mouth while blushing heavily, though she looked amused as well. Okay, Boris, Carlson turned to look at the badass politician. You're going to pull another publicity stunt. Just go for it. Boris had the good grace to look a little embarrassed. Politics. What are ya going to do? I got the Omnitrix ready. Ladies and gentlemen. Boris stepped forward to stand on the red stand, walking up to the podium, Fantasma and Mikhail giving us a look before walking up to us, his voice projected through the speakers. Our dear Fantasma, hero of the Winter Guard, will now be leaving us. There were some sad calls out, several members of the media talking into their mics. I looked over at Fantasma. She was smiling sadly, waving at the audience of people. She will be joining the Avengers, representing the glory of Russia across the world, fighting alongside the heroes of the world to defend our great nation overseas. Creel and I looked over at Carlson in shock. Sky and Fitzsimmons did the same. Carlson looked over at us blithely, then smirked. May chuckled. What? You didn't think she was just coming with us for a trip to the States, did you? Carlson asked casually. Do all super spies just love having more info than the rest of us, was the best response I could give. It's one of the perks of the job, he chuckled. In the meantime, Boris had been continuing his speech. But as we say goodbye to Fantasma, we also greet two new heroes. He gestured to Mikhail. With a step forward, he began to grow. His muscles inflated, his Ivan Drago features became Smokey the Bear features. His military uniform was apparently made with easy tear-away Velcro or something, because it came apart everywhere. His pants stretched to match him. Soon, a big shirtless bearman stood and roared. The audience gasped in fear and awe. His fur shone in the sunlight as he posed proudly over everyone. Apparently Mikhail had a hell of a good conditioner. Ursa Major? A skilled warrior and esteemed soldier of our nation, now joining us to continue that fight. Boris said proudly, Mikhail roaring, as though to punctuate the statement. Carlson and May, meanwhile, shared a look. 2. Carlson asked. From above us, she came. Surrounded in an aura like a starlit sky in the shape of a star around her body, the young woman slowly came down toward us. Dressed in a black leather armor with a yellow star in the center of her chest, her blonde hair flowing behind her. With the starlit aura around her and her eyes glowing with colorless energy, she looked like an avenging angel. Dark and powerful. The blonde landed to a series of flashing cameras, walking up to shake Boris' hand and give a hug to a happy Fantasma, Mikhail speaking to her fondly. Ladies and gentlemen, Darkstar. Boris cheered, the blonde stepping forward to wave happily at the crowd. Oh hey, new frenemy. Simmons chirped. When I gave her a look she explained. Fantasma said you kept calling the Winter Guard that. Yeah, that was probably appropriate. And, last but not least, Boris continued once the cheering died down. As a gift to our brave American friends for the aid they supplied the Winter Guard, we have decided to gift them this. He gestured to the plane behind him. So that was their game. And apparently the crowd was loving it. Good way to look good, giving a free plane to the Americans for the aid provided. Instead of, you know, some of us almost dying to try and help. Say what you will about the Russians politicians, they are really good at public relations. As the cheering died down, Boris and the Winter Guard walked over to us. Boris looked apologetic as he clasped hands with Carlson. I'm sorry Carlson, but it was the only way I could convince them to let it go. I understand, Carlson said. He didn't sound like he meant it. Boris didn't seem to mind that. He gestured to Darkstar, who was eyeing Creel and I curiously. Oh, this is Lania Petrovna. Hello, it is very nice to meet you all. Lania said in heavily accented English. She sounded like a Russian Fluttershy. Petrovna. May asked. Like Vanguard. I asked. He is my brother, Lania said with pride. She looked at Creel in particular. He, say, that you saved his life. Thank you. Creel looked surprised. When he smiled, I've never seen the big lug look more pleased than at that moment. Except for when he was with Isabel. Well, we had better head out, Carlson said, looking closely at Lania. But I think Bridge will want to speak with you soon. Boris was unfazed. Carlson. Despite what others may say, the Winter Guard is thankful to you all. We know what you risked for us. So thank you. Carlson seemed pleased by that. Thank you for saying so, Boris. Now, we've got a hell of an exit to make. Ms. Petrovna, it was good to meet you. And you? Lania said. Huh. Pretty chirpy young woman. Fantasma and Mikhail were saying their goodbyes when Carlson pulled me aside. Mahmoud, Carlson said icily. Yeah, Carlson. Any chance you can change the paint job on this thing? I grinned slowly. Sure. Just say the word. Great. Carlson looked over at Boris, who had for some reason brought everyone to the front of the plane. Now, I really want to get Lola into this thing. But Boris is wasting time at this point. What is he doing at the front of this thing? Is there a door we missed? As Carlson and I watched silently, the front split open. Carlson and I walked slowly outward until we could see what was happening. The entire nose cone of the plane rose up, spitting out a long cargo ramp. Carlson and I shared a look. Dude, Russia has been really weird. It always is, the older agent said while we watched Lola the beat-up convertible get gently placed inside the plane. With that little statement, I raised the Omnitrix. You know what though? We Americans can go all out too. Carlson smiled at that. I got to see the footage later. While the others entered the Antonov through its weird nose ramp, I waited outside, some cameras focusing in on me. The second everyone was secure, Carlson let me know on comms, so the cameras caught me reaching a hand up to my head to reply. Then I pushed down the Omnitrix. Upgrade. The second I had turned into that giant mass of nanotechnology, I merged with the Antonov, the sounds of surprise filling the air as I did so. As always, it looked like black liquid metal with green circuitry running through it encapsulated the entire surface of the vehicle until it was colored exactly the same color as me. I connected my body to the plane and took it over. In a matter of seconds I took control of the entire plane. Cameras flashed as the now super advanced cargo plane turned its engine to face the tarmac and fired up. Hundreds of tons of steel floated upward. On the side of the plane, a massive logo appeared. The symbol of shield. Not bridge. Shield. I figured it was only appropriate. Peace out, Russia. I crowed through the plane's speakers. It's been fun. I twisted the engines around again and blasted off to Chapter 117, Villains. Ivan Kragov. Ivan watched from his secondary base on a small TV as his decayed nation celebrated the efforts of their new circus clowns, the Winter Guard. The old communist clenched at the arms of his chair, scowling angrily at the tiny screen before him, the TV illuminating his face in blue. The damned fools even rewarded the Americans with a plane? But that was Ivan's fault. He had failed. He had underestimated them all. Not just the Winter Guard, with their false god and witch. He had underestimated Bridge. And Dial, who had devoured a nuclear bomb. Such power in that watch. Ivan had paid the Avenger little mind at first, believing him to be nothing but brute force in battle. But enough brute force had overwhelmed his forces. Of course, the Bridge members had managed to hack his superior technology, destroying his wonderful super apes. Ivan needed to be more prepared. Even with all the enhancements he'd made to the apes, all the deals he made with Hydra, with that new American organization, to test their technology in combat. He'd made deals, compromised where he wouldn't have otherwise, all out of his impatience. And now, here he was. A failure? The TV was suddenly broken. Ivan blinked at the culprit. Large black knuckles had slammed down on the Soviet-era technology, shattering it apart while Ivan had been slowly stewing. For a moment, he wanted to shout. Then he sighed. Mikhail, I understand you're upset on my behalf, but the TV was not the issue. From the shadows, a gorilla stepped forward. A gorilla that was untouched by cybernetics, and unlike the Mikhail that Chernobyl had fought, this gorilla was normal-sized. But he carried himself differently, more intelligently, more confidently. Oh ho, Mikhail walked up, shaking his head. His hands flickered between different signs for a few moments, then shrugged. Yes, I suppose I have been rather foolish, old friend, Ivan sighed. The gorilla was joined by an orangutan and baboon. Same as Mikhail, they looked normal. Same as him, they carried themselves with intelligence. They swung down from the rafters to land before Ivan, eyes filled with concern. I rushed things, Ivan said forlornly. I compromised my morals, forced myself to work with monsters, to create rush jobs. And now, my enemies are celebrated by the country I love. Ivan swallowed. Tears fell down from his eyes before he could stop them. The apes looked at each other, worried looks on their faces. Miklo sighed, nudging at the baboon, Igor. Igor rolled his eyes and stepped toward Ivan to comfort him. Then the orangutan hissed, spinning to face the door to the large room. The gorilla and baboon turned as well in alarm, while Ivan snapped to his feet. Pyotr. Ivan snapped toward the orangutan. What is it? There was a knock on the door. Ivan stared at it. No one knew about this place. That was the point of a secondary base, that even when the primary one was compromised you could still have somewhere no one could find. Excuse me, someone said through the door in very rough Russian. Dr. Kragov? My big-headed asshole of a boss wanted to speak with ya. Miklo, get the door. The gorilla nodded, walking up to the door. With surprising gentleness, he opened it. Jesus, you're even hairier than I expected, the man behind the door said. Been hitting the Bowflex too, eh? I mean, I try, but I'm a lazy fuck, to be honest. Ugh. Miklo said in confusion. Yeah, I have that effect on people. Before Yvonne could say anything, the man slipped around the gorilla. The man was rough looking. His hair was shaved at the sides and spiky on top, a tattoo on the right side of his head. His beard was rough, peppered with salt, and his eyes were wide, filled with glee, as though he was always in on some joke no one else had heard yet. He was wearing a warm grey jacket lined with fur and a ballistic vest made of some material Yvonne didn't recognize on top of that. He had a large futuristic rifle on his back that had some sort of sea green crystal where the barrel should have been. He was also familiar to him. Chloe. Kragoff asked, surprised. Hey, terrible, Chloe teased happily. You look good. Yvonne scowled. That nickname was never funny. Ah come on, Olizes Chloe grinned. Yvonne the Terrible doesn't like his name. What do you want, Chloe? Kragoff scowled. What does a dead man want with me? I come with gifts, Terrible, Chloe grinned, reaching for his pocket. Mick Hall growled, Chloe stopping the motion for his pocket with a frown. Hey, can you call off Joe Young over here? I come in peace and all that shit. Yvonne thought about that. He thought about that for a very, very long moment. Chloe's smile widened and widened, his fingers flickering. Mick Hall, Igor, and Pyotr glared at him. Violence seemed to tinge the air. Chloe, if you kill me, you will face horrors unimaginable, 3 apes growled, filling the room with the sounds until they seemed to bounce off the walls and reverberate off the bones. Fair enough, Chloe continued to reach into his pocket and pulled out a round device. He flipped it open. My boss said you would appreciate this. The big-headed bastard is usually right about that. A hologram floated in front of Yvonne, and his jaw dropped. Where, how did you do this? Chloe laughed. Oh, you think that's good? Just wait, Terrible. We're about to have a hell of a time. All the while, the sea green crystal in Chloe's rifle continued to hum. Antoine Triplet. Walking through the halls of a base in a secret location in Siberia, Trip led Sharon and Laura to a room in the center of the base. He ignored the various scientists and guards that lived in the base. None of them mattered. He soon strode down a set of metal stairs in a room with monitors and machinery all over, scientists looking up at him as he entered. Then they met eyes with Laura and quickly looked away again. Laura had that effect on people. The young woman was always eyeing people in a hostile manner, always looking as though she was moments from embedding a sea green blade deep into your throat. For some reason, Trip had never seen her giving Sharon and him similar looks. But the fact was that the leather-clad woman was antisocial, to understate things massively. Trip stopped before the man at the center of the room. Sir, Trip said slowly. Wolfgang von Strucker looked up from what he'd been doing, which was typing at a computer while listening to music apparently. He was standing while doing so. As always, the scepter was at his right hip in a holster. On his left was a small table holding a red glove. Once used only to let him use the scepter without worrying about being manipulated in turn, the glove was larger now, more armored. Behind his back, it had gained a name of its own. The Satan glove. He smiled when he saw Trip. Ah, Agent Triplet. It is good to see you are well. Trip eyed him. One punch to the larynx. That's all he wanted. Just the chance to do it would be worth the whole world to him. Von Strucker seemed to notice the intensity of Trip's gaze. He didn't seem to mind at all. Instead he lifted up his glove and put it on his left hand, then gestured for the 3 warriors to follow him, walking toward a dark hallway with Trip, Sharon, and Laura in tow. How did your mission go? Successfully, Trip said as coldly as he could. The image of the helpful Chinese scientist he'd killed flashed into his mind. I see you were forced to kill innocents again. When Trip gave Von Strucker a startled look, the scientist smiled. I have been inside your head, Agent Triplet. I dare say I know you better than you know yourself by now. That was galling to hear. Still, Trip couldn't even deny that. Deep within him, in a sunken place where the last of himself fought to be heard, he tried to scream. But he did not. He breathed while drowning, staring out from eyes that weren't his own. He tried to speak his true thoughts. To raise his gun as they walked, fire it into the leader of Hydra's face, and find his way home to the people he loved. Nothing. He was only able to follow silently. That is what I like about you, Agent Triplet, Von Strucker said in satisfaction. Even with the conditioning we've done, you still manage to hold on to your will. It is impressive. But it is also valuable to me, Von Strucker sighed sadly. I am surrounded by sycophants. Once, I might have liked that, before the events of last year. Now I find your naked hatred rather fulfilling. It keeps me from being arrogant. What is it the youths say? My haters are my motivators. He chuckled at the look he got from that. It is true. I find you enjoyable, Agent Triplet. Funny, even. Trip tried to reach for his gun. Von Strucker smiled when Trip continued to follow him obediently instead. You have the chip. Yes, sir. Trip patted the pouch on his left hip. Then we can complete the project. They entered a room that was strangely empty. There was only a table, a large metal armchair, and a tarp-covered object resting in the chair. There were dozens of wires stretching from its back and into the wall. The room was extremely chilly, tinged with a bit of frost. Von Strucker held out his hand. The chip, please. Trip opened the pouch, reached into it, and pulled out the computer chip. Von Strucker stared at the innocuous device as though it was made of gold. In many ways, it might as well have been. He took it into this gloved hand and walked around to the tarp-covered object's back. Months of research, thievery, and work. All to recover what we lost. Hydra's greatest weapon has always been science. Not the worship of dead deities or dependence on alien powers. Always the science we could use. He slipped the computer chip under the tarp. A small click could be heard. He pulled his hand back out, sensed the computer chip, and nodded when a green light shone from under the tarp. The wires quivered for a moment. Then the tarp shifted slowly as the object underneath rose up. The sound of fans filled the room, moving the chill air around them. Snicked. The sound of Laura's claws popping out of her knuckles filled the room. Don't you dare! Von Strucker shouted angrily. Laura's claws slowly slipped back into her hands as she stared at Von Strucker. He glared at her, then looked back at the object. The tarp slipped off, revealing black metal underneath. Gears twisted around, wires curled, and the being beneath rose completely. It was shaped like a man, but instead of a face, it had a metal block with a red lens that glowed. It lifted hands of steel and twisted the fingers around, staring at them through the red lens. Then it reached for its stomach with its right hand. Its cool metal fingers met a screen. It hesitated before speakers on the machine spoke. What is this? Your return, Von Strucker said in satisfaction. After 42 years your mind truly lives again. Dr. Zola. Trip watched the screen in the center of the robot, flashing the green image of a confused Arnim Zola. Then the robot stared at its own hands again. And Arnim Zola slowly smiled. Chapter 118, Luke Cage. Luke Cage / bartender. Back again, Luke walked up to the woman who was lying her head on his bar counter. He smirked at the growling sound she gave him as she lifted her head to look at him. Jessica Jones was gorgeous. It was the first thing someone would notice about her, the long black hair, big eyes, and general beauty. She was also, what, you wanna send me to an AA meeting? Jessica growled. Abrasive as hell. Luke chuckled. No, just noting a fact. I'm pretty sure your job is to pass me drinks, Jessica drawled. Not one to be put off by rudeness, Luke only smiled. Only when someone actually orders a drink, as opposed to using my bar as a pillow to sleep on. Jessica scowled, but Luke thought he could note a hint of humor in her eyes. She pointed at a random bottle on the shelf lazily. Taking that as a request, he took the whiskey down and poured a shot, passing it to her. She downed it immediately and gestured. Chuckling slightly, he passed her the bottle, watching with some fondness as she started to drink. With no one else in the bar, he was able to lazily walk around the bar and enjoy the quiet. Then a vehicle outside went spinning past with a squeal. Luke and Jessica both looked out at it. The red van was speeding with no regard for any rules of traffic. They both watched curiously as it spun around the corner. Then another squealing sound filled the air. Luke turned to look at it. A man was leaning out of a lowrider from the back passenger seat. In slow motion, Luke got a good look at him. He was a big man, with skin as dark as Luke's, and a smile filled with gold. He was clearly laughing as he hefted the weapon in his arms. For a moment, Luke stared at the weapon the man was leveling. A rocket launcher. An honest-to-God rocket launcher. Pointed right at them. Down. Luke dived over the bar to pull Jessica to the ground. She rolled with the movement and yelled out indignantly when he shielded her with his body. He ignored her, closing his eyes as he braced himself. The rocket flew in and exploded against the bar. Fire and shockwaves surrounded them. Luke roared as the building fell on top of him. He could hear Jessica doing the same in his ear. When the shaking stopped, Luke opened his eyes. He was surrounded by rubble, gray dust falling about their heads. He could smell smoke beyond the debris. Rising slightly, he looked down at Jessica. You okay? Fuck no, I'm not okay, she shouted. What the hell happened? Luke scowled. Someone was trying to blow up that van. Well, they fucking missed. Jessica shouted. She stopped moving. Do I smell smoke? I think a fire started. Luke looked around again. The rubble had fallen around them in a small pocket. He gently pushed upward and felt the building above him move. I think I can move this. You. Jessica scoffed. Yeah, no. Move out of the way, I can get us out. You. Luke replied right back. Jessica, let me dash. She raised a fist and punched upward. Her fist embedded into the rock behind his head like a nail into wood. Luke stared at her as she smiled smugly. See? I got this. Just move out of the way and I'll dash. Luke pushed upward, his large palms on either side of her. Slowly, tons of weight was lifted up in a complete disregard of reality. Jessica stared at Luke's face a few inches from her as he smirked. Yeah, I think I can't help you there. She continued to eye him. Then a slow smile came to her lips. Together, the pair began to push together. Stone, wood, metal, and glass were moved with little to no effort by the two superhumans. Soon they had dug their way out of the rubble. The pair rose to their feet, Luke's yellow shirt and Jessica's black leather clothes covered in dust. God damn it, Luke stumbled as he walked off the pieces of what had once been his friend's bar. This is just dash. He stopped speaking, clenching a fist in anger. Jessica was standing behind him, watching silently as he stared at the remains of his workplace. All gone. Burning to nothing. Along with everything that had mattered about it. The time he'd spent making sure it was clean and cared for. Wasted. I'm sorry, Jessica said, drawing his attention. When he looked over at her she looked away but continued to speak. I know it meant a lot to you. For some reason, he could believe that. The sound of someone laughing drew his attention. He froze. Further down the block, he could see the red van had been overturned. He could also see that his wasn't the only building hit. 4 more had the signs of an explosion, a window high on one billowing out flames, another shuddering, people screaming. The man laughing was tossing aside his rocket launcher as more men were rummaging in the red van. 6 men grabbing boxes from the van, 2 carrying guns, and 1 insane lunatic laughing as he stood on the roof of a lowrider, another one parked nearby. Come on boys, get a move on, the large man in a grey tank top laughed from the roof of his car. Avengers ain't going to be distracted for long. Luke stared at the mess before him. People were screaming, running out of burning buildings. The group of men were still working on robbing the truck. The man on the lowrider saw the running people. He smiled, a gold-tinged, deranged smile, and gestured to one of his men, who tossed him an SMG. The man raised the gun to aim at those running away. Hey, Luke heard. It took him a moment to realize he was the one who had yelled. The man heard him, looking over at Luke. Luke, Jessica protested, moving to stand next to him. What are you doing? I can't let them hurt any more people, Luke said slowly. He wasn't a hero. He'd never claimed to be. But apparently, there weren't any Avengers coming just yet. So how could he stand aside while others might die? How could he not step up? Well, looky here now, the man hopped off the lowrider and grinned at Luke. What is this nigga? You want a piece of this with your white girl there? Maybe let us have a piece of her too. Luke scowled out of one of his most despised words being used, then strode forward. He was surprised to find Jessica joining him. You don't have to do this, he whispered to her. Yeah, I do, Jessica sounded positively enraged. She pointed down the street, where 2 more buildings a long way down had been hit by more fire. I'm pretty sure that fuck hit my building. Well shit, what were the chances of that? Get behind me if they start shooting. I'm bulletproof. God bless Jessica for not being as fazed by that as he would have expected. Oh now look at this, the man sounded almost polite as he strode forward with his men. Motherfucker, what exactly do you think you're doing? No one has to get hurt. Luke called as he and Jessica strode toward the group. Just leave these people alone. The man blinked. Fuck man, you serious? New York's changed since last time. Used to be motherfuckers ran from Barracuda. And explosions, come to think of it, he grinned. Well fuck, I like you? Hey, how fast can you dodge? He raised his gun and started shooting. Jessica ducked behind him as the bullets started hitting him. Small bits of metal rained down on the asphalt along with bits of yellow cloth. For a long moment, the sound of gunfire filled the air. When it was over, the man was staring in shock at Luke. His men lowered their weapons in sheer awe as Luke wiped at his chest, more bullets falling on the ground. What the fuck is this nig dash? Before he could complete that sentence, Jessica spun out of cover and grabbed the hood of a car. With a twist and an ear-wrenching pull, she ripped the hood off, then spun to toss it at the group. The hood spun like a disc across the space between them, then hit 2 of the men like a giant frisbee, both men screaming as they were sent flying. Shit, light 'em up, the man yelled, his gold teeth flashing as he spoke. The other man, who hadn't been knocked down by an enraged woman with a car hood, unleashed hell. Luke ignored the bullets, instead running toward the group. Jessica ducked behind the car, only to come back up and toss a piece of the engine, shattering one of the men's legs. The leader of the group ran for one of the crates, opening it up. As Luke ran toward him, he came up with a large RPG, one with the words hammer tack written on the side. All right you tough motherfucker, let's see what you got, he screamed as he pulled the trigger. The RPG flew towards Luke before he could make a response. He tried to dodge, but contrary to what some thought, dodging a rocket-propelled grenade was impossible. It hit him hard and exploded in a burst of fire, sending him flying. Luke rolled after his airborne flight, shouting as he bounced off the pavement before slamming into a parked car with the sound of shattering glass and steel. You fuck. Jessica, enraged, pulled out the engine block from the car she'd been using as ammo. Oh damn, one of the men said in awe as the small woman lifted 300+ pounds of steel over her head. Riot. Jessica tossed the block. It flew with baseball pitcher speed, bouncing once on the ground. Oh goddamn, the leader shouted as the engine block barely tagged one of his men's arm, then hit the red van, sending it skidding across the pavement. Grah. Luke roared as he exploded out of the car he'd been embedded in. Soot rested on his pectorals from the recent explosion. He stared at the leader of the man who had shot him, who was hopping into his car. The leader smiled a gold-toothed smile. Damn, motherfucker, you tough as shit, he said jovially. He laughed while revving up his engine. Jessica and Luke rushed toward to try and chase him. Catch you later, bulletproof motherfucker? Haha. Jessica poured on the speed, outpacing Luke by a wide margin, but she still was unable to catch up as the car began to speed away. She stopped to crouch, then exploded upwards. She cleared 30 feet, reaching out for the car as she fell towards it. The leader gunned the engine further. Her fingers stretched out, and barely smacked the back of the car. The strength of the impact ripped off a chunk off the trunk. Jessica hit the ground hard, cursing loudly as she rolled with the impact but still scraped her cheek against the asphalt. Damn, that girl is hot. Luke could barely hear the driver say over the roar of the engine and Jessica's caustic cursing. She looked up at him. She rose to her feet, her eyes flashing with rage, blood dripping slightly from the scrape on her cheek, an ugly thing that had him wincing in sympathy at the sight of a patch the size of a round playing card that had been scraped to the muscle. So, you can fly, huh, he said as she glared at him. Her glare faded just a bit before she could control it. Luke would have said more, but the sounds of sirens in the distance drew his attention. God damn it, Jessica said as the sirens came closer. She turned to walk away. Where you headed? Luke asked. Well, Jessica glowered. I was going to head to my apartment. But now I need to see what the hell is left of it. Let me help, Luke immediately said, following her. Don't need it. Luke chuckled, his eyes following her. No, you don't. But I still want to. She didn't turn to acknowledge that. But that was fine. He could live with that. Chapter 119, Back Home. The second we'd lifted off, I put some work into the plane itself. I couldn't do much since, despite Upgrade being able to live up to his name, I still needed to work damn hard to make sure my changes were permanent, and even that was optimization, repairs, or other superficial stuff. Later I might work to get some more interesting stuff done, but based on what I could see of Carlson as he wandered around inside me, a new plane might be better. I also shut off several trackers that had been left inside the Antonov, repaired some smaller issues that would have been missed by a human mechanic, and added little things to make the plane more fuel efficient and faster. Not as good as Tony or Jury Rig, but damn good for a few seconds of work. Then May twisted the controls. I spun in a little daredevil maneuver in accordance with that. Curious, I sprouted my head in the cockpit. Hey May, everything okay? May looked at me idly, as though random heads sprouting out of the wall was an everyday thing. I swear, we're all getting so jaded on this job. Oh, sorry. I was just testing her out. I get that, I said thoughtfully. Tell ya what. What about I manipulate the gravity in the rest of the plane so they don't get affected, and I let you go nuts? You can do that. May asked in surprise. May, Upgrade is stupidly overpowered sometimes, I said, my round green eye turning up in an Upgrade smile. Seriously, you wanna have some fun? She smirked. Then she pulled back on the controls, bringing the Antonov into an insanely fast climb, before spinning at high speed. I manipulated the gravity in every room except the cockpit to keep the others from feeling the sudden speed and spin, then let out a whoop of joy, May smirking just a bit wider. Mahmoud. Someone yelled inside the section of the plane that could be called the lounge. I pulled my head from the cockpit and sprouted it in there. Carlson was standing in the center of the black and green space, while Sky and Fitz were sitting nearby. Carlson looked at me as I rose out of the floor in front of him. What's up? Are you responsible for that? He pointed at the window. Outside, one could see just how much fun May was having. Yeah, I said with a small chuckle. May wanted to go all out. Can you at least change the view? Some of us are feeling a bit queasy seeing the world twist outside while we're all standing still. Carlson looked over at Simmons, who was holding a hand over her mouth as Fitz rubbed her back. Oh, she said weakly. Sure thing. I manipulated the windows to show a normal sky. Thank you very much, Carlson smirked. Now, can you check on our Russian guests? I'll join you in a moment. I nodded my tendril head, then flowed through to the ship to where Mikhail and Fantasma were. Then I stopped when I realized they weren't the only ones there. Creel and Sky were with them, the foursome sitting around a large metal barrel with a spigot on the side. They all had some clear drinks in small shot glasses, apparently coming from the metal barrel. Where did that come from? I asked as soon as I saw the barrel. Mikhail cursed in surprise when he noticed my head popping from the floor, then looked me over. Dial? What in God's name? I blinked a circular eye. Yeah, what's up? You're ahead, Fantasma said weakly. Mikhail tried to poke at me in fascination, recoiling when I shifted my form back. Don't do that, I said, twisting my eye to stimulate a frown. That is so strange, Mikhail mumbled. Yeah, he does this sometimes. Sky sipped her drink, giving me a fond smile. Where did you guys get the vodka? I asked, cocking my head tendril. This. Mikhail looked down at it. Oh, I requested it. He tapped it with a chuckle. I figured it would be a while before I got real Russian drink. He means, Fantasma grumbled. He's the drunkest bear in Russia and he loves proving it. You want me to take that back? Mikhail pointed at her drink. Fantasma took another lazy sip, smiling at him. Also, what was that earlier? He pointed at the window. I know I didn't drink that much dash. Could have fooled me, Creel mumbled. So why was the world twisting? Mikhail continued. May wanted to have fun. I tried my best to shrug. Fantasma and Mikhail staring at the odd image of a head shrugging. May. Sky said in sheer disbelief. She can be pretty fun sometimes. We aren't talking about the same May, are we? Sky said again. Carlson came in right about then carrying a bunch of files. He stopped when he saw the barrel. I'm going to just assume that's your fault, he said to Mikhail. The part-time bear grinned, chugging back his drink and pouring himself another. The leader of Team Shield smiled, walking up to join us. First, pour me a glass. Creel politely reached for a glass. Second, I have your papers. He held out the papers to Fantasma, who rose and took them. About that, I said. She's an Avenger now. Yeah, when were we getting the memo? Creel added. He looked over at Fantasma. I mean, I like you. And I'm the last person to judge how ready someone is to be an Avenger. But it's unexpected, you know. That is understandable, Fantasma said in slightly accented English. She was once again sitting as calmly as a queen in her court, one leg draped over the other as she lifted her lips just a bit. It was a surprise to me as well. Apparently, the Russian government was always planning on doing this, Carlson added. They weren't sure of who would go, but the decision to send a Winter Guard member to Bridge was in motion for a while. But recent events accelerated that. Krakow, Fantasma needlessly explained. And you're okay with that? Sky asked incredulously. Just being traded off like a baseball card or something. Phantasma glared at her. Of course not. I finally found a home. And now I must leave it. She looked over at Mikhail. He gave her a sad, but proud, smile. Sky looked over at Carlson, who I noticed gave her the same smile. However, it is for my country, and the world, Phantasma continued firmly. I will work as hard as any other Avenger, this I promise. And spy on us on the side, Carlson added wryly. While Phantasma looked offended at the insinuation, Mikhail nodded. That is side benefit, true. Mikhail. Phantasma seemed aghast. The part-time bear chuckled. Do not worry. It is a mark of respect among spymasters to acknowledge the fact we spy on one another. I imagine that you left a few bugs in our base, he added to Carlson. Carlson shrugged. Felt rude not to, was his shameless reply, the older man smirking. As well it would have, Mikhail chuckled. As well it would have. You guys are weird, I said, at last, Creel, Sky, and Phantasma all nodding in agreement. Phil Carlson. Carlson strode through the Antonov, trying to get used to the makeup of the plane. Despite dial mixing together with the plane and making some changes to the interior, like shield symbols on a few of the walls and a shiny black finish with green circuitry lines, the upgrade trademark, the plane still didn't feel right. Granted, he'd only been there for a couple of hours. But this little gift from the Russian government wouldn't feel like home for a while. For one thing, it was 90% cargo bay. Felt like it, at least. There were some thin walls, sure, but there was still a lot less privacy here than there had been on the bus. And that was the crux of the matter. No matter how long he walked through the ship, he couldn't help but remember his former home. Best to get used to it. The bus wasn't coming back. Better to move on. Of course, the old plane hadn't been the only casualty of the little war in Russia. Carlson stopped near the back of the plane and eyed Lola for a moment before sighing. She'd been secured nice and tight toward the right. She was also still covered in pits from where plasma had melted the car across her surface. The wheels had also been melted, the windshield shattered, and the upholstery covered in bare fur and large scratches. She'd had much better days. I'm sorry about Lola, sir, someone said behind Carlson. He turned to see Fitz standing there, the young man looking more than a little nervous. She'll be all right, Carlson said sadly. You know, these old shield vehicles, they were made to fight in an emergency. To save the day at the last minute, he patted Lola's red hood, careful to avoid one of the holes that had been burned into her. I think she appreciated the chance to do it again. We'll get her up and running again soon, sir, Fitz said kindly. Just like new. Thank you, Fitz. Carlson looked over at him. So, did you need to speak with me about something? Fitz winced. Why yeah, it's just. I've been thinking, Simmons and me were thinking, ever since we started this, we love working for you. Fitz was now speaking a mile a minute, crossing his arms nervously. So we wanted to talk to you, but then all that stuff with Kragoff and Russia, and we didn't want to dash. Fitz, Carlson said kindly. He smiled at the way Fitz cut himself off immediately. I already know. Fitz's arms fell to his sides. His eyes widened as the rest of him stilled. You do. How could I not? Carlson chuckled. I've known you for this long, haven't I? It's not like I can blame you. You've been doing a lot of good work with Stark, of course you'd want to continue that. I want you to be happy, both you and Simmons. If you have to leave to do it, I don't think I'd mind that too much. The British young man sighed in relief. Thank you for understanding, sir. Can we still come on missions with you, every once in a while? Well, that's up to the director, Carlson shrugged. But if it was up to me, absolutely. Fitz's face lit up happily. Thank you, sir. Then he let out a little sound. Oh, right. I have some recommendations for replacing us. Would you like to go over them with Simmons and I? Sure thing, Carlson said. Great. Fitz rushed off, turning to run backwards so he could face Carlson. I promise, the people we've picked are the best, perfect OOP. He stumbled back into a crate and nearly fell, righting himself to continue his sentence. They'll be perfect replacements, I promise. Fitz ran further in excitedly. As he did, Carlson's smile sank away. He turned to Lola, resting his palms against her. I doubt that. I really doubt that. New plane, new team members, new organization. Phil Carlson was really tired of losing things. Mahmoud /dial. We got home in record time, considering our plane was late Soviet-era attack. Wonders of alien nanotechnology enhancements. When we got there we landed on the Enterprise, the helicarrier in its usual spot floating high above New York with her camouflage panels on. The second that the front of the plane rose up, Director Maria Hill was there to greet us along Nick Fury, both dressed in their best clothes. As we walked down to greet them, Fury was the first to speak over the winds of the skies around us. I hear you broke my plane, he said to Carlson. Take it up with Kragoff. Carlson smirked. And whose fault was it that crazy monkey fucker destroyed it? Fury said grumpily. Had a full superhero team and you couldn't keep the damn plane intact? She had a bar. Director Maria rolled her eyes. Fury, if we can get to the important part. Fury gave Carlson another Cyclops glare then nodded. Honestly, he looked sadder about the bus than Carlson. Phantasma, Mr. Ursus, it's a pleasure to meet you both, she said with a smile. Phantasma, I believe you already know about the rules that have been set in place for provisional members of the Avengers. Yes, Director Hill. Phantasma put her hands together in front of her and nodded with a serene smile. I promised to follow all those rules for the duration of my time as an Avenger. Maria seemed satisfied with that. Then I'll have Dial show you and Mikhail to your rooms on the tower for the time being. Welcome to America. After a quick trip to the roof involving Phantasma floating us down to the tower, I led my Russian friends into the elevator. As the doors closed, Mikhail hummed to himself thoughtfully. Things have changed. Once there would have been many security checks before I would have been let on American soil. I had assumed some security protocols at least to make sure we are who we say we are. What makes you think there aren't? I cocked an eyebrow at him. Hey, X, you guys still at it? Over the speakers, X replied. Yes, sir. It is good to see you, by the way. X. Phantasma asked curiously. One of my best friends, I replied with a shrug. Right now, the first thing he's doing is reading the Omnitrix's unique signature to make sure I'm me, while also comparing my weight, gait, DNA, and brain scans all match what we have on file. He's also tracking any other energy signatures. That I am, sir, X said politely. I wanted to mention that Phantasma has a strange energy around her. Her magic perhaps. You don't believe in magic? Phantasma asked as though the idea was no surprise to her. I have no opinion on the matter, ma'am, X said politely. I reckon trying to make assumptions without any proof would be a mistake on my part. Pleasure to meet you by the by. See, you're making friends already, I said to Phantasma with a grin while still facing the doors. But yeah, this place has more safety protocols than most any building on Earth. We've been working on everything from quantum physics to superhuman genetics, stuff lots of people would like to steal. Don't you get uncomfortable with that? Phantasma asked while quirking her ruby red lips in a frown. Being under constant watch. I do. But then I think of all the assholes in the world who would want to sneak in here just to touch Black Widow's hair or try to steal an Iron Man suit, and suddenly I'm a lot less worried about it, I snarked. Her hair? Phantasma asked worriedly. You don't think, now that I'm an Avenger dash? No, I said reflexively, narrowing my eyes. You're one of us now. I was mostly exaggerating, but if anyone thinks of messing with ya, we're kicking their asses either literally or metaphorically in all the ways possible. That is comforting to hear, Mikhail said softly. I admit, I was dash. The elevator came to a stop. When the doors opened, all three of us were surprised to see who was standing there. Natasha. Nat. I asked at the same time. Then I looked over at Mikhail, who was looking a little. I don't know. You ever see someone you cared about years after the last time, but your last memories of them are connected to something you'd rather forget? The combination of sadness and fondness, where your eyes narrow but a smile comes to your face all the same. That was the face Mikhail had. And Natasha Romanoff had the same look on her face. Mikhail. It's been a long time. Yes, it has, he said softly. We all stepped aside to let Nat inside. As we did, I gave Phantasma a confused look. She returned it, apparently just as lost. The doors closed behind my redhead mentor. For a moment, Mikhail looked down at her with that look. You look good, young one. Not so young, these days, Nat said with a smirk. Oh please, I gave the buxom redhead a sarcastic look, the kind I'd learned from her. You'll outlive us all and look damn good doing it. Nat gave me a smile. So, you've taken on students? Mikhail said, eyeing me. Yes, her gaze on me became thoughtful as I started to wonder if there was something much deeper going on here. Him and another. That is good, the rough man said. The Red Room, it should be forgotten. But to see its teaching being used to help the world seems a fitting vengeance. You know about the Red Room? I asked in confusion. Mikhail's teeth showed, his eyes flashing the same color as his bare forms. Oh yes. I destroyed them, in the end. Oh damn. There really was something way deeper going on here. You never talk about it, Phantasma said softly. It was a monstrous place, Mikhail said softly. Nat seemed to agree. You, Mikhail eyed me again. You have taken on a legacy that you may not have realized. I hope you are ready for it. I looked over at Nat. I don't know. I don't think I mind taking on Nat's legacy. After all, I lifted the Omnitrix, the green hourglass symbol glowing. We do have the same symbol. Nat's Black Widow symbol, a red hourglass in a black circle, was resting in the center of her belt. She looked down at it and tapped at it, a little clink-clink following the motion. Yeah, guess we do, she said softly. Chapter 120, finally. Nat's Black Widow symbol, a red hourglass in a black circle, was resting in the center of her belt. She looked down at it and tapped at it, a little clink-clink following the motion. Yeah, guess we do, she said softly. Natasha, Mikhail said. There is something we must discuss in private. The doors opened then. I stepped out and gestured. This is our stop. Who's coming? Phantasma, Mikhail, and Natasha all filed out. Then Nat took a hold of my left arm with a grin. Before I could say anything, she twisted my arm and twisted around, sending me stumbling with a kick to the butt. Nat, what the hell? I yelped as she sent me through an open door. I stumbled into one of the empty conference rooms that were set up through the tower and turned to look at my grinning mentor/friend. Sorry, Mahmoud, Nat chuckled. But I doubt you'll mind too much. I gave her a confused look as she shut the door, Mikhail and Phantasma looking just as startled behind her. Then I looked to my left. I suddenly realized what was happening. Jen, I said softly. Jennifer Walters, the incredible She-Hulk, was standing before me with her arms crossed. She walked up to stand very close, nearly a head taller than me, and smirked. Hey, heard you had a hell of a trip to Russia. I didn't say anything. I just looked up at her for a moment. Her green hair was loose around her shoulders, her eyes flashing that familiar emerald. It's weird, you know? Trying to figure out if how gorgeous she was had to do with her in general, or if I just kept thinking of good moments we had together when she smiled. Nice shirt, I said at last. She uncrossed her arms and cocked a hip confidently, letting me get a good look at it. The Omnitrix symbol rested across her chest, the black shirt stretched very tightly across her form. Thanks. Before I could say anything else, she rested a hand on my chest and pushed me back against the wall behind me, biting her bottom lip. I let her do it, still looking up at her. You know, you've been getting pretty big. All that time in the gym has been working for ya. Her right hand flattened against my chest. For all her strength, the way she curled her fingers to stroke her palm against me was gentle, and possessive as well. I didn't say anything as she stepped closer, stooping down toward me. She smiled just a bit as our foreheads touched. Her hand moved from my chest to my back. I'd like to say I was confident and cool. That as Jen held me there, I managed to be as suave as Tony was around women. But I could feel my heartbeat speed up in my chest as my eyes widened, my palms getting sweaty. God, how sad that Jen being so close to me made more nervous than armies of Hydra and Super Apes ever had. But there was more to it. She didn't move any further, just keeping me against the wall. Her left hand wrapped up in mine. So, you going to do anything? She asked confidently. Her gaze was so steady on me that I almost didn't catch the slight catch in her breath. She pulled me closer. Or just keep waiting. I couldn't take my eyes off hers. They were green with flecks of brown like chocolate chips floating in mint ice cream. Right up until my eyes closed and I leaned in, wrapping my arms around her waist, my brown skin resting against emerald. Our lips met slowly. She sank down towards me, pressing me against the wall. We held each other close. After a long moment, she pulled back, panting heavily with a grin on her face. Took ya long enough, you dummy. Sorry, I was breathing slowly. I leaned my head forward to touch my forehead back to hers. I was scared. Hard feeling like I was worthy of ya. Isn't that up to me? She whispered softly. I pressed a hand to her cheek and went for her lips again. She met me in the middle, and we slowly sank to the floor. Natasha Romanoff / Black Widow. What was that about? Phantasma asked curiously as Natasha led Mikhail and her away. Natasha smirked. Nothing too crazy. Just Dial working on the interpersonal relationships of the team. Phantasma didn't seem to know what that meant, while Mikhail didn't seem to care. Natasha led her fellow Russians down the halls of the Avengers Tower, ignoring the sound of something heavy falling behind her. I believe Dial already mentioned our security measures, so you can be assured of your safety while in the tower, Natasha said. Your room is going to be in between Alloy and Hawkeye's. And don't worry, Tony Stark doesn't skimp on rooms. Natasha stopped in front of a door and opened it. I am sure it will be Phantasma stopped short to stare in awe. The room was massive, like the others in the tower, large enough to be a penthouse suite. The kitchen was well made and shone with new hardware. The living room had an entertainment system and couch all set up. The big surprise was the library set up in the near center, just behind the living room. Bookshelves made of some sort of wood that had a purple sheen surrounded the center, which had a soft-looking carpet with Arabian-style designs sewn across it. A large desk stood in the center as well and on it sat Harry Potter. Phantasma narrowed her eyes at the books that were stacked on the top of the desk. She strode across the room to glare down at the books as though they had personally offended her. Then she looked at the paraphernalia surrounding the books. A fake wand, a time turner, a snitch, and wizarding robes. Natasha smirked at the annoyed look on Phantasma's face. I think he left a note. Phantasma lifted the piece of paper on the desk and read it silently. Then she burned it with a pulse of purple flames. I have yet to meet Stark, but I do not like him. He called you Hermione, didn't he? Mikhail said with a sigh. The Violet Witch growled in a perfect imitation of Mikhail's bear form. Natasha, still hiding her amusement, gestured to the bedroom. Go ahead and leave your bags in the bedroom so we can continue the tour. In the meantime, let me show you where you will be staying, Mikhail, and then some of the important areas. Phantasma, still scowling, went into the bedroom and left her bags, coming back out with another glare. I prefer Dresden Files, she grumbled under her breath. Natasha led them to Mikhail's room, which was more of a generic but very nice hotel room than anything, then toward the laboratories. It was there that Phantasma met another Avenger. Bruce, Natasha said as they met the scientist in the hall directly outside the various labs, which could be seen through the glass walls all around them. Bruce, dressed in a lab coat and warm-looking hoodie, gave Natasha a smile, then nodded toward Phantasma and Mikhail. Hey Nat. You giving the tour? I did pull the short straw, she joked. I believe I don't need to make any introductions. That was true. All the Avengers had watched the Winter Guard's introduction and read the files Bridge had immediately created on every member so that they could learn about their new counterparts. It's good to meet you both, Bruce said, eyes slightly wider than normal as he smiled just a bit crookedly. It is good to meet you as well, Phantasma responded with a bit more enthusiasm. I've heard good things about you. That all you've heard? Bruce asked, giving Natasha a bit of déjà vu. Phantasma paused for a moment, biting her bottom lip before speaking. It was all that mattered. A chuckle from behind the Russians drew their attention. They turned to see Steve Rogers walk up to them with mirth in his eyes. Now that sounds familiar. Bruce and Nat shared a pleased grin as Steve walked up to hold a hand out to Mikhail. Good to meet you. I'm Dash. Steve, everyone on Earth knows who you are, Nat interrupted. It was cute that Steve didn't realize how famous he was, because he honestly looked a bit befuddled. She is right, Mikhail shook Steve's hand with a bit of an odd look on his face. I am a fan of your work, Captain. You are. Phantasma, Nat, Bruce, and Steve said in surprised unison. Of course, I have his collectible cards. Mikhail chuckled. Well, Nat was getting some serious flashbacks now. Phantasma gave the older man an odd look as she shook hands with Steve, who seemed both touched and slightly uncomfortable all at once. Well, I'm honored. And it's a pleasure to meet you both. Steve looked Phantasma in the eyes. I'd also like to welcome you to the Avengers. While it might take some time for everyone to get used to the idea, I want you to know we're at your disposal. If you need anything, we'll all pitch in. All we ask is that you fight alongside us honorably. Phantasma straightened up, her face firming with determination. Do not worry. I will comport myself as a valued member of your team. Steve looked down at her a moment longer. He towered over the shorter girl, looking almost gigantic in front of her. Despite that, Phantasma continued to glare up at him with pride, not shifting her stance at all. Steve seemed to note this. He nodded firmly. Great. Good to have you on the team. Same here, Bruce chuckled. Well, anyway. The other guy might feel different down the road, but I'll keep him as calm as I can, he joked. Nobody seemed to know how to take that. Bruce's amusement faded at the awkward silence and he coughed awkwardly. Well, I got to get back to work. It was nice meeting you all. He turned and walked into his lab as fast as he could, Nat smiling at him. Bruce being able to joke about the Hulk was good, even if he wasn't a natural comedian. Anyways, let me show you to the dash. Nat stopped when a loud clanking sound drew nearer. They all turned to look. Jarvis and X, both in their android forms, slowly approached them. Jarvis was still dressed in a suit, looking very dapper, while X was wearing a bridge t-shirt and some blue jeans. Mornin', X said politely, passing the group as they watched. Morning X, morning Jarvis, Natasha responded calmly. Jarvis's eyes turned off and on in a simulation of a blink. Good morning. Apologies for the briefness of our greeting, but we must attend to our duties. Mr. Uriokovich, Mrs. Phantasma, welcome to the United States. With that, Jarvis continued on, leaving Phantasma and Mikhail staring after X and Jarvis. Are they in suits? Phantasma asked. I don't believe they are. Mikhail looked over at Natasha. No, they're androids, Natasha said easily. They built themselves bodies so they could help the team. Don't worry, they're officially employees and quite friendly. Mikhail and Phantasma didn't seem to know what to think of that, while Steve rubbed the back of his neck uncomfortably. Natasha hid her own feelings on the subject. She knew Tony had some countermeasures on the back burner just in case some non-friendly AI showed up, and she'd long since made him promise to share. She spun on her heel and started walking. Come on. Let me show you the recreation area. After showing them around for the next few minutes, Mikhail and Nat finally got a chance to speak in private. Or at least as private as things could be in the Avengers Tower. While Natasha liked Mikhail all right, he was still technically a superhuman capable of turning into a massive bear that worked for a government that had pulled a rather duplicitous stunt recently. Hard to have complete trust without having the naivete of a child. So they stood in a large and empty room made of black material with computer systems connected to X and Jarvis network, one set up to bring out automatic turrets in case brown fur started to fly. I was not lying earlier. You look good, Natasha. Happy, Mikhail said fondly in Russian. Natasha eyed him. She wasn't exactly the cuddly type, so having Mikhail looking down at her like an uncle proud of his favorite niece was an odd experience. She didn't like it much. Considering what they had gone through together, she was willing to let it go. Thank you, Mikhail, she said magnanimously, using her home language as well. He seemed to realize she wasn't feeling it and changed tactics. So, have you taken any other students? Does that matter? She asked, raising an eyebrow. To her surprise, he frowned. It might. The Red Room may be better off left in the past. I'm not using their methods, Natasha scowled. Beyond the morality of it, it's also damn wasteful. Natasha, I know that, Mikhail crossed his arms. The problem isn't you training them. I am not the only one who recognizes how Red Room recruits look in a fight. Dial has little to nothing of the instincts of a true killer and I still recognized it. She rolled her eyes. You recognized it because you've seen it up close. He uses more boxing than anything else. To her displeasure. He was willing to learn everything else but he never seemed to absorb the more athletic moves that could have helped him in combat. Then again, she may have been biased in that regard. And the other students. Natasha thought of Ruby. The former Hydra student was coming along very well, absorbing every lesson she was taught with impressive speed. It wasn't as though she hadn't shared a few of her skills with SHIELD operatives. But Ruby and Dial were the only ones she'd put real work into, and Ruby was the one who took to her lessons. Mikhail, what are you so worried about? Natasha asked at last. I'm not sure, there have been some dash. He cut himself off, worry creasing his brow. Let me think on this for now. I don't want to overly worry you. Mikhail turned around. Mikhail, Natasha snapped. He stopped immediately. Not today, Natasha. Today, my Phantasma is joining you. This is a good day. We have time for worries later. He left her with that. Natasha crossed her arms and turned to look at the wall behind her. The Red Room. That place was never going to loosen its grip of her, was it? She walked out of the room a few moments later, walking aimlessly toward the labs. As she passed, Bruce popped his head out. Hey, Nat? Have you seen Jen? Natasha felt a mischievous smile grow on her face. Oh, yeah. She might still be busy. You want to see her? Bruce nodded, sighing in relief. Yes, thank you. I just wanted to ask her about her dad coming over soon. Her smile widened a bit more. Well, let me lead you to her. What do you know? Looked like the day was going to end on a high note.